they're built a little different, but I didn't think Denver here
but
that much
they have
to
to
do that
continue
cold
in a way that
at
ridiculous. Yeah, prove that they did. But like stuff like
But if we
man, this
start
is
restricting
great
short-term
time to
rentals
like
even more,
get pictures that show
just the
all of
chili
these
was spicy and warming though. So.
Yeah, that's
just something I was thinking about
yeah,
as I was
and
walking
we
around.
do,
Yeah,
uh,
and honestly, he's so burdened that we handle.
now there's something weird about using Quorum
tickets.
okay,
Yeah.
all right. How are
Yeah.
we
In fact, we
doing?
use our summer
Way
intern
there with
a
the
lot to do a
To do
lot of
that?
monitoring because that's when it's at its height.
Yeah, right.
And we have extra capacity. And so she
would have
builds
to be
all
like
the packets of stuff, and if it
but
gets
that's how our
yeah.
prices show it, which there's something weird.
Okay.
So, you know,
Platted,
Okay.
like,
interesting. You want to let them know about it?
Yep. We are going to begin in 1 minute. Do we know if Brian's coming? Heard anything about Brian not coming?
And he even emailed, I'm sure he's coming, because
Okay.
he emailed us and he didn't.
Yeah.
Is that all
I
we're
thought
waiting
there
for?
was a date coming up.
I'm telling, I thought he's been
Jess.
still coming.
Jess,
as
so Jess is
protest.
not coming?
You think what?
Protest. That wanted it.
Oh, that's right, she's been sick. COVID, right?
I don't know.
She told me what she had.
Pneumonia's going around too.
Everything's going around.
Don't die.
So that is one
Yeah, right.
thing that we discussed.
The norovirus is going around.
In the past, you know, like Light and Power meets at
My
5:30
daughter's
and
just
they
getting over influenza
budget
today.
dinner.
She
So
got flu shot.
HR's like, yeah, you can do that.
North Carolina's been really sick.
I don't know.
Was my
I
name
don't know
wrong?
how they do it.
No.
We've done it once a
Oh.
year
It was
before.
getting
It was
pushed
with
off
the joint meeting. We just had all the food in the train.
Okay, everybody ready? Welcome, everybody, to the Traverse City Planning Commission study session. Today is January 22nd. For those who brave the cold, thanks for being here. Do we need to take roll?
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Deturi,
Here.
Commissioner Hershey,
Here.
Commissioner Knapp,
Here.
Commissioner O'Brien,
Present.
Commissioner Treadwell,
Here.
Commissioner Swanson,
Here.
and Commissioner Heller is absent, and maybe we'll see Commissioner McGillivray.
Thank you. As always, we'll start with our land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. Are there any announcements?
I have none at this time. Did you have any?
Announcements? Okay, so we will dive into our study session. The first topic is the 2024 annual report. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go ahead and give a brief overview of this report. Couple items to begin this agenda item. For one, this is a report that is required by our enabling state legislation. Every year there needs to be a report summarizing Planning Commission activities submitted to this legislative body. So we've created that report. In the past, there was a practice where every department would give an annual report to the City Commission. We've moved away from that, but we were doing 2 reports a couple years ago. Since there was so much overlap, we combined them in just a single department and Planning Commission report, since we're working on a lot of the same things together. So that is the catalyst for this. The next item to begin is that this is very much in draft form. We want to show it to you today, and I'll walk through some items that we look to backfill once we get further through some of our discussions before submitting it to the City Commission, and only after we bring it to you all for approval. And then lastly, I just want to thank Katie and our department who did a great job laying this all out in a very aesthetically pleasing fashion.
nice.
So with that, if we scroll through, the first page of the document has 2 sections. The first section is just planning and zoning. So what the department does, what planning and zoning is, it's just a broad overview. The next section is talking a little bit about the Planning Commission, but this is where, in addition to looking back at the year 2024, we want to put some insights into looking forward for 2025 into this report. So someone in the public looking at it would have an idea. So it is only after you all establish your goals for this year that we will put those in there with some content and then bring it back to you. So scrolling on to the next page, we put a little bit of our year-end totals of what it is that we've been working on, both as the Planning Commission and the Planning Department. So you'll see that we had 542 vacation home rental license approvals. So that includes the renewals that occur each year, in addition to any new ones. Now, the licenses are issued by the clerk's office. However, there is a zoning compliant component that gets filtered up to our office that we have to sign off on that, yes, that is a legal use in that district. We permitted a total of 373 dwelling units. So if you recall, we've been talking about this for some time, but after 2020, we saw a bit of a spike in dwelling units. Now, a lot of these are multifamily dwellings, so one land use permit might have 50, 60, 70 dwellings in it. Some of those that we started permitting back in 2021 and stuff, they haven't even been constructed yet. So one example would be Novo Hall Street. You know, that's counted in that data as permitted, but not constructed and occupied, because that happens at various rates. So we did have a bit of a dip in 2023. We talked about it at the time. A lot of economic issues going on, higher interest rates, cost of materials, lack of labor. But we did see that jump up by approximately 150 dwelling units this last year. So we're getting back on par with where we've been in the past. And again, we issued a total of 140 land use permits. So as I mentioned, one land use permit may encompass dozens and dozens of dwelling units, but a land use permit can also be issued for an addition, a deck, an ADU. It can be issued for a commercial interior renovation. So there's other reasons in which we would issue a land use permit. In addition, it's not in the zoning ordinance, but we do manage the sign ordinance, and we issued 49 sign permits this year. We issued 44 official notice of violations through code enforcement. So to kind of give you the breakdown about how code enforcement works, usually when we see a violation, the first step is a one-on-one interaction with the person. Let them know that it's a violation, ask them to correct it, give them a time period to correct it. Then we follow up. If it continues, then we issue an official notice of violation. We typically send that by certified mail so we know that they received it and we can have it on file, all part of building our case, because in order to issue a ticket and have it upheld by the magistrate, we have to show that we tried to get the party to be compliant first. Otherwise, the ticket gets dismissed. So it's a bit of a process there. So Historic District Commission, we had 6 requests this year. So historic districts, we have 3 of them. Any exterior work that requires a building permit has to go to the Historic Districts Commission. So replacing a window, replacing your siding, those don't require a building permit, so therefore they don't go to the Historic Districts Commission. Board of Zoning Appeals, we've only had 2. We've talked about this for a while. That's actually a good thing, right? That means your zoning ordinance is somewhat dialed in. If you have a bunch of BZA variance requests, especially for the same thing over and over again, that's usually a signal to the Planning Commission, like, well, we might have these ordinance regulations a little off. Maybe we need some tweaking. But the fact that for probably 4 consecutive years now we've had little to no variance requests, that's a good sign. Then the next 3 items are those that come to the Planning Commission for review. And last year in 2024, we didn't have any PUDs. The last one that we had was Addiction Treatment Center on I think it was State Street right there, by Phoenix Hall. We had, I'm sorry, that was a SLUP that we did. We had no SLUPs last year, and we had no site plan reviews. So the last site plan review I think that you all did was Marriott Hotel in December of 23 is when that happened. Or maybe even, maybe that was when it was. But we do know we're going to have some of those coming this year, right? We've already had a preliminary meeting, conceptual review with Tim Pulliam and the TC Millworks property. And as many of you are aware, Safe Harbor is moving towards applying for a year-round shelter, which would be a new SLUP that starts with the Planning Commission. So moving to the next page, we kind of get into code enforcement, and it's just a data breakdown of where the code enforcement officer, the type of nuisance issues he's dealing with the most. So he had a total of 460 investigations. Most of the time, it's complaint-driven. That's how we know that things are happening, because we don't have patrol officers in the code enforcement office like going around the city looking for things. It usually has to be brought to our attention. And quite a few different types of violations. So a lot of sign violations that he dealt with. It's no surprise it's so high this year. It tends to spike during presidential campaign or election years, because that's when people start putting out a lot of signage and stuff. Tall grass, brush in the streets. That's a big problem in the fall and the winter, where people start putting their leaves in the street prior to the time when they're getting picked up, disrupting drainage patterns and street sweeping. We had quite a bit of trash. And then the next big one that we had on there was the miscellaneous complaints that just kind of didn't fall into one of those categories. So total of 460 investigations. As I've mentioned before, our code enforcement officer spends the bulk of their time doing rental inspections, which are applicable for properties that have 3 or more dwelling units. So he did about 500 of those last year. So that's, almost 2 a day, and it takes a lot of time of coordinating with the property owner to get permission and get access into the property and provide that inspection, which is primarily a safety inspection.
Miscellaneous complaints needs to be, it says compliance
Yeah.
instead
Oh,
of
it's
complaints.
misspelled.
Yeah.
Yeah, good catch, yeah, it does say compliance.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And then the next page kind of talks more about the administrative side of the meetings. My predecessor used to refer to the planning department as the packet factory because of all the boards that we oversee and have to put together those packets and serve as liaisons too. So we did a total of 35 public meetings. This does not count the master plan leadership team, the mobility, but rather city bodies. So throughout that process, that was 20 20 planning commission meetings, 5 historic district commission meetings. Now, if you recall, we had 6 requests. There was a meeting that had 2 requests at it. That's why we have a difference of 5 and 6. The Commons met 4 times, which we're required by law to meet 4 times a year. We're meeting next week, and we're scraping to find things to put on the agenda because we're required to have it. Board of Zoning Appeals we discussed, and then we had our Riparian Buffer Committee that met 4 times last year and is continuing. Next, we just have a little bit of highlights about the membership. So we had 5 regular meetings, 6 study sessions, and 7 special meetings. So special meetings are ones where we can take action outside of the regular meeting. In some cases, these were scheduled outside of the first and third Tuesday, or they were a study session that we turned into a special meeting so a decision could be made at that time. We also put through on that section the different boards and committees that members of this planning commission serve on as well. The next page, I'm not going to spend really any time on, but it's just a highlight of the agenda discussions that have occurred throughout the year for the city commission's benefit and the public. The next page goes through the actions of the planning commission. So most of these were recommendations to the city commission. We had the CIP, we had a rezoning, which was the Ida Tompkins School across the street. We had our mobility plan and master plan. You all did put forth a recommendation to the city commission to reduce the minimum acreage required for Tim Pulliam's PUD, and then, of course, the initial introduction on that. So the next section gets into the highlights of 2024, and so far we have the Riparian Buffer Committee, and so Leslie has provided that context of what they've been working on, and then it moves into short-term rentals. One thing I would like to probably add to this section, this is more for my team, is that we also did adopt a master plan and mobility action plan this year, so we should probably put that in the highlights too. So we'll slap that in there to call out. And then 2024 was the first full year after the city commission enacted the housing reforms that the planning commission had worked on. And so we listed there what they were presented with that you had recommended to them, including the ones that they had decided to move forward. And I think this is a great learning opportunity, if we will. We did hear a lot throughout that prolonged process about this massive transformation that was going to happen. And we tried having those conversations that there's a lot of barriers that prevent that from happening, willing property owners having to assemble properties, interest rates available, financing, all that kind of stuff. So we're about 1.5 years out since those were enacted, and I want to just note that we've issued in 1.5 years 5 permits under that new set of zoning. So as we said along, it was never going to be a panacea. It was just one more tool in the toolbox. We never had a single real estate investment trust contact us and express interest in taking over a block. That's not how things really happen. And in an area as expensive as it is to do any of that kind of construction and stuff as ours, it creates kind of a natural cap from that. So most of what you see on there are just smaller projects. So we did issue a couple duplexes, because remember, those are now legal in R1 and R1A and R1B. We did some ADUs that they're counting as a second dwelling. That was one thing that I thought was kind of interesting, if I can be honest, throughout the process. There really wasn't any opposition to allowing 2 homes on a double lot. Well, with the reduction in minimum lot size, many of our lots count as a double lot. So now, before where we had checks and balances for ADUs, as far as the minimum size has to match the house, there's none of that for building a second home. So a lot of people who would be building an ADU are now just calling it a second home, and they don't have to meet all those requirements. Their guests only have to stay 30 days instead of 90, and so sometimes I bring this up because a lot of the logic got lost in the rhetoric through these conversations, and I think it's important to kind of keep that in the forefront. What is the reality, not just the feeling that we're dealing with here? I will say that one down on Santo, that was, for as much scrutiny as everyone up here received over some of this from a handful of people, when that dad and daughter came in, it made every bit of it worth it. It was a case where it was a dad, his young adult daughter. They were so happy because a duplex is something they could afford. Dad had much better financing terms than a bank did, and so his 21-year-old daughter was going to have her own place. He was going to have her own, and they were just so joyful to have this opportunity that you all helped present to them. And so I just wanted to share that with you because, again, that was a meaningful, positive impact that you made in real people's lives in our community. So, yeah, and that basically sums it up. The very last page is just a nice East Bay sunrise, and we finally, Benjamin did, thank you.
Really?
Benjamin.
That's a nice picture.
And we finally got department headshots. So.
Yeah, look at that.
With the department kicking and screaming, we put their pictures on the back page so people know,
I bet.
especially with the code enforcement officer, when they're showing up to your house, sometimes you'd like to know who this person is who's going to come knock on your door.
Well, he gave me a nice ride to the resort this morning, so.
Mike did?
Yes.
Yeah, there you
Aw.
go. So, all right, with that, any questions?
Does anybody have any questions or
It's
comments
really
about the
mostly just
draft?
a kind of factual report out of going through the agendas and summarizing.
In terms of how, I would like to understand more about, you mentioned that formerly the planning department and the planning commission had separate reports and they were combined about 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 or 3, something like that.
And was there any, at that time, was there any planning commission specific content that has been sort of lost in the consolidation process? I also wondered
Well, let's
if
answer
we-
that question first, one
Okay.
at a time, please. So I would say no, because the planning commission stuff is prescribed in the state law. Like, you have to have the summary of what was discussed, the summary of what was enacted. So if anything, I would say this report, the content in here goes well above what the state law requires to
Great.
report. So,
Great.
okay, so I'm sorry, second question?
The second question had to do with the treatment of 2024 goals for the Planning Commission, which my understanding was that there weren't any identified, and I just wondered if that should be acknowledged somewhere rather than just leaving that as a gap.
Well, in February, the Planning Commission did adopt their annual goals for 2024, which included the short-term rentals, the riparian buffer zone, and
And the master
getting the
plan.
master plan and mobility plan adopted. So those were the main ones for 2024. Because remember, we made that Gantt chart even afterwards that showed the timeline. That all came from the Planning Commission's goals. And those are summarized in that highlight section that Leslie and Katie put together.
I think it might be appropriate, and I would love to hear other opinions, but within the early page that talks about 2025 Planning Commission goals, just to include a statement about 2024, the Planning Commission specific, as part of the summary.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, there's just 3 of them, so we just put them in the bullet point summary that we put in there. And then it gets into more depth later on talking about it. But yeah, it's a good intro spot for it.
Any other comments? Okay, go ahead.
I wondered in terms of our data points about you said there were 5 permits that were allowed under the revised zoning in the last 18 months. And I didn't notice that mentioned that specifically within this report. Did I miss it?
You may have. There's a whole section on that towards the end.
Uh-huh.
It's the third of the highlights.
right? And does it mention the 5 permits?
Yeah, there's a map and everything
On page
showing
13 is the map.
13.
Yep, so page 13
Mhm.
shows them.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just spotted it. Great.
Yeah, and Leslie made that map to call out the location of each one, just so people can understand. And you'll see it's kind of throughout the city, you know, it's not just all in one neighborhood or anything. Now, granted, there's neighborhoods that don't have any, but with 5 in almost a year and a half, we can't really represent every neighborhood through that, so. And
All right.
again, you know, one of the natural caps is, where is their opportunity? So, if there's an opportunity or will, not much is gonna happen.
How about everyone else? Anybody have any suggestions?
I think it looks beautiful.
It is beautiful.
It
You
is,
did a great report.
I've seen a lot of these, and it looks really great.
If you guys have any more spelling errors or anything like that, can you just email me and I'll do that.
And CC us too, so we can boo her the whole time.
He keeps track of all my errors.
Jackie?
One more question. The 542 vacation home rental license approvals, is there any way to dive deeper into that beyond just the total number? Is there any way to categorize that or help us to understand that big number a little more specifically?
What specifically would you want it broken down into?
I don't know. I don't even know how they are categorized. I mean, are there sizes? Are there ADUs
Well,
versus additions to existing homes? Are tourist homes included in here?
Yep, so short-term
Um,
rentals, I'll address some of those they're the umbrella term that includes vacation home rentals and tourist homes. The difference being vacation home rentals, you can rent out the whole property without the owner present. Those aren't allowed in the neighborhoods. The tourist homes the owner has to be present. ADUs are prohibited for any stay less than 90 days, so none of them are allowed to be used for that purpose. And you can't really, when you read the language for tourist homes, you can't structurally alter your house for a tourist home, you know. You're supposed to just use your existing home to do it.
How about something location related? You know, which of the commercial districts?
They broke it down later in the package.
Yeah,
Later
it's
in
later in the
packet.
packet.
Sorry.
We've
It is
provided
in
that
the
map
annual
before.
Not in the-
It's under the short-term rental discussion for
Yep.
tonight.
Yeah, the one that we can easily do is like by zoning or,
So
yeah.
for those that don't, you know, Jerry's on staff, and Jerry is our GIS and tech guy, so he maintains a lot of the databases that we have. So if there's something specific that you can articulate that you want to know, let us know. Just email it to us, Jackie, and we can put it in. Because like the short-term rental discussion today is coming back because no action can be taken today. So if you let us know, we can generate that.
And my request was in the context of the annual report, and I think it would be helpful, given that there were so many of those permits, to see them broken out geographically would be, in the report, would be helpful.
I think,
I think what we'll do then is put a link to the map. It changes every day because every day they're doing new approvals and stuff,
But
so.
isn't this just for 2024?
Yep,
Annual
but
report? And
yeah.
There's an endpoint?
Yeah, we'll look into it. But again, it's not a static thing a lot of times. I mean, one we may have permitted, and then they may have sold it in 2024, and it no longer is a short-term rental anymore. But we did at one point permit it, so.
Yeah, what do you have to say?
it might just make sense to include like new and renewals in like a parentheses.
Yeah.
So that way at least people know that it's not like, oh my gosh, 542 new. Like
Yeah,
it might
that's a
just
good
help to
idea.
give a tiny bit of context. Because I think, I see what you're saying, Jackie, and I also see that like it's just the annual report. If people want to dive deeper, take them to the
It's-
map or take them to the
Exactly,
site
because
or
that's
something.
not the purpose of this. We're trying to
Yeah.
satisfy.
But
legal
maybe-
requirements.
But that's a good.
New and
versus making
renewal
new versus renewal.
Gives a
Yep,
little
we
more
got that note down
context.
there. Yep.
Brian?
And we can
Could
even
do
break it
plus or
down.
minus over the previous year.
We can
okay,
probably do a graph.
Because it doesn't, just plus or minus over the previous year at a certain point of time, whenever
Yeah.
you do it. And doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but it does show people that we didn't get 546, whatever the number was,
Yeah.
in new ones in 2024.
Yeah,
That's the
definitely
current
with the
number.
newer, because I think when we showed you a map in the fall, when short-term rentals were first really being discussed, I think at that point, the number was, Jerry, if you can help me, 586, somewhere in there. So I think it's actually trending down, which aligns with what we're hearing from realtors, property managers in that industry, is that it's shifting, so.
I
Right.
think anything we can do to characterize that number more, at a more detailed level would be helpful to the people who are using this report.
Brian?
This is an overview of the year. It's just a snapshot.
That's all it's
I mean,
supposed to
we
be.
can ask to put everything in it, but it just sucks up staff time, which reduces our ability to move anything else forward. So no reason to get too deep in the weeds on this.
Any other comments? Is there any public comment on the draft annual report? All right, then we'll move on to our next discussion point, which is proposed zoning amendments to increase the allowable density in the R2.
Yep, so I just want to, again, preface the study session, there is no action to be taken today, but in the discussion at the last meeting about the annual goals, one of the items in the master plan, because if you recall, we went through that master plan document, was the increasing the density in the R2 from 2 dwelling units per lot to 4. As we discussed at the last meeting, this was one of the items that was within the suite of changes recommended by the Planning Commission to the City Commission. The City Commission received a presentation on each of those in August. They then took action to formally introduce a number of them, including this one. This was the last of the 6 or 7 that they discussed and voted on that night. As we discussed at the last meeting, there wasn't, because, I mean, Debbie and I were watching it, there wasn't like a consensus, like, we don't want to move this forward. There was some discussion, and then it just kind of ended. There was no motion, there was no vote. So some of the planning commissioners have contacted us throughout the year of like, well, whatever happened to that? It's just kind of dangling out there. And so as we discussed it last time, it was brought up by Commissioner McGillivray, well, if it's already teed up, let's just bring it to the next study session and see what we want to do with it. Let's look at it and talk about it. I have had the chance to talk to 2 city commissioners about it who were on at that time, and you know, one of them was like, yeah, I kind of remember that. I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just a long night, an emotionally charged night. We were dealing with a lot of stuff, and I think it just kind of got away from us that one. So that being said, it is now back before you to discuss and consider. The idea was to maintain the existing scale of development that's allowed in the R2, not really improve or not increase that at all. So right now, the R2 allows 2 dwellings per lot, and the city allows that to either be attached or detached. So for instance, down here on Boardman, we have some R2 at the alley just down the street on the opposite side. There's 2 homes, one in front of the other, because that's R2, you're allowed to have 2 homes, but they're separated. So in the draft language, you will notice that you can go up to 4 dwelling units, but you can't exceed 2 structures for residential purposes. So in other words, you could have a duplex structure and another duplex structure. You could have a triplex and an ADU. Both instances, it equals 4 with 2 structures. Or you can have 1 quadplex. Now, of course, you could have a single-family home. You could have a single duplex. But if you wanted to reach that max density, that is how you would be able to do that. Lot size would stay the same. Maximum impervious coverage would stay the same. Everything would be equal. If you look at the map further in the packet, you'll notice that the R2 typically exists as a buffer district between higher intensity commercial corridors or downtown and the lower intensity low density residential district, the R1. So it creates that step down in intensity of use. However, with the changes that occurred to R1 and the lack of changes to R2, R1 and R2 are exactly the same right now. There's no differentiation, and we've lost that scale of density transition between the districts. So that's why it's coming back again for consideration. And as I mentioned last time, the day before our meeting, I had a gentleman in who owns a couple adjacent lots in Traverse Heights where he also lives, and he was looking at building duplexes. But if he could build quadplexes, he would build quadplexes on those lots. So he came in again yesterday to see where the conversation went with the planning commission. I told them that, you guys wanted to bring it back, so he'll be probably coming back again next week. But there's just another example of, we acknowledge that we have a shortage of housing. We have a local resident willing to build the housing if the density permits him from doing that. So it's an example of how the dots are connected in meeting our needs. So with that, I don't think there's really that much additional information. I did incorporate some review from the master plan for your reference, so you don't have to pour through it, but of course, I hope you are all familiar with it, as well as the future land use map. So, zoning districts and future land use categories are not the same. They're even drawn a little different, but when you change the zoning district, you're supposed to look at what the future land use map is calling for to make sure that it's not inconsistent. And those future land use boundaries are not hard boundaries. They're meant to be breathable and somewhat open to interpretation, because as we know, this is looking 20 years into the future. We don't know what the future is going to hold, exactly where those boundaries should be. So the R2 operates or exists in areas that are labeled contemporary neighborhood. Those are some of the ones you would see on top of, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, if it's Buffy Hill or Bowie,
Yes.
Buffy, okay, or at the base of the peninsula, or some parts of Inkachi, where you have very large lots, no sidewalks, no curb and gutter on the streets. It's a very different type of format, as opposed to the traditional neighborhoods that have your gridded street pattern, your alleys, your sidewalks, and things like that, and pretty consistent property or lot sizes. And then the transitional neighborhood, again, it was brought up by Commissioner Shaw at the master plan review that the former plan did talk about the intensity between the future land use categories and making sure, they called it emissions, that it didn't spill over from one to the next. But it didn't give a lot of prescriptive ways of how to achieve that, which is why we built off of that in this master plan by actually calling out where those transitional districts should be between the higher intensity and lower intensity land uses. And so that's kind of where that originated from. So with it, we are just looking for action or not action, but guidance from the Planning Commission if this is something that you are interested in moving forward. And just because you move it forward doesn't mean you're committing to recommending it to the City Commission. And of course, it doesn't guarantee that the City Commission will support that either. So we'll just kind of see where that plays out, if that is where the interest lies. So in the packet, you'll find the draft language. We really just pulled this from the last time around that we incorporated in there. We also will have to, if there is a change to the R2 chapter, we will have to change Chapter 1368, which summarizes all the dimensional standards for every district to reflect that. And then the last thing we threw in there, in addition to the map that I previously referenced in the future land use stuff, is, I think I had one more map down here, the poster board that we had at the housing open house, if you will. So it showed some of the drawings and ways that that 4 dwelling unit intensity could work, and he provided a little bit of overview. But since we had presented that before, we wanted to bring it back to you guys. That's all I have on that.
We're opening it up for discussion now. Who has something to say on this topic?
I'd like to discuss it further. I mean, I'd like to bring it to a meeting where we can take action on it as is. I mean,
What it was before.
yeah. So
Jackie?
I've been asked by residents, is there within the existing language anything that would control for someone with 2 contiguous R2 lots being able to build essentially 1 8-unit structure that would span those 2? Do the setbacks prevent that, et cetera?
Depends on where it is.
Yeah, so you can't have a development, setbacks would, you can't have a building span 2 lots. They would have to be combined into one, and you can't have more than 4 dwelling units per lot, regardless if the lot is twice the minimum size. You can't exceed 4. That's the limit. And if you have a legally non-conforming lot that's less than the minimum size, you're still entitled to the 4 as well. It's just like, you know, we have a lot width right now of 35 feet in the R1, but we have lots that are 25 feet, because when the city was platted, they were all 25-foot wide lots. So you still have the same rights to build on it. You can't prevent someone from developing it if it's too small.
Thank you.
All right?
I'm good with moving it forward. I do have some questions about it. Just right in the existing language, which is existing language, basically mixed density residential R2 district is for the purpose of allowing up to currently 2, but proposed 4 dwelling units per parcel. And here's the issue that always gives me I question, which is designed to be architecturally compatible with surrounding housing. What does that actually mean? Because I've seen it enforced very differently by planning directors, because it's your decision, right? And then if they don't like it, your decision, they could challenge you, and I don't think you'd have much to stand on, because there's no definition of what architecturally compatible means.
Yeah, and so typically that is the intent at the beginning, which really isn't looked at as being regulatory too much. If that was something that was desired, I think it needs to be codified to actually predictable standards, right? Because if we try to enforce that, you and I may have two different interpretations, you know, where a setback of 4 feet is 4 feet to me and to you, you know? So it's like, again, that's one of those slippery things where I don't see it having enough legal leverage to really be an enforcing regulation. I think it's intent. It's trying to tell you what it's trying to achieve in the district.
The one caveat is if it's in a historic district, right? Then you actually have
Yeah, except
required.
we don't in our department review that. Then it
No,
has to go
they
to the
do.
historic district.
The board would.
They make those calls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, really, because you hear a lot in the community, people complain about the way new buildings look. It's not compatible, it doesn't fit in the neighborhood, common arguments. I don't know if, maybe we wait till we have a public hearing and see what kind of feedback we get, if that's an issue or not. My other question is simply, is there, or does anyone have the ability to adjust the setbacks that aren't already spelled out in the ordinance?
Only through variance.
So they would have to seek a variance to them, okay.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, I know there are some that serve on the BZA. It's a pretty high bar to get a variance. It's not a matter of just asking. A lot of people are like, when we tell them, well, you can't have your house there, they're like, well, I'll just get a variance. I'm like, well, you have to have a demonstrated hardship that wasn't your creation, and economics can't be the reason. It says it right in state law. So in other words, like, well, I want this variance so I can do it cheaper. That's not a reason to grant a variance. And that's what we call a dimensional variance. A use variance is an even higher bar. Basically, you have to prove that none of the uses in the district that your property in can actually operate, and therefore you have no viable use of your property, which is considered a taking. So without the variance, the city would then have to pay the property owner for the value of their property. So pretty locked in on setbacks.
Thank
and
you.
Stuff. Yeah. Now, can I add one caveat? Front setbacks. Front setbacks have a little bit of wiggle room. It's
For
like
trees,
what's that?
for trees, and because you get, the setback is with the plus or minus.
Plus or minus
4
like 4 feet of
for
the
the
block
average for the street, yeah.
So I
I
mean,
don't really
there's a
consider
little
that.
bit of wiggle room there, but they can't say I want to be 8 feet over the block average. I can't authorize that.
Right.
Mitchell?
Yes, concurring with some of the statements that have been made so far, I think that this should be moved forward. But looking at specifically the fact that without any changes, R1B and R2 are the same in a lot of things, I'd be willing to entertain slight changes to setbacks and other requirements for R2, like changing aggregate side setback from 14 feet to 12 or 10 feet and impervious surface from 45% to 50%. Not major changes, but something that would, at least in paper, set it a little further apart and could possibly provide a little more flexibility, recognizing that many of these lots might already be relatively narrow to put a second structure or to put a duplex on, and just a little more flexibility could make it more possible.
Okay. I will say that as part of the amendments in the fall of '23, they did increase the impervious surface. So you can see that in there. You can go up to 5% more, but to go above the 45%, so anywhere between 45.1 and 50%, then you're subject to the stormwater control ordinance. Now, I do want to point out that any structure that is 3 or more dwelling units also has to meet the stormwater ordinance regardless of how much impervious surface, and they will have to more than likely do fire suppression to meet construction code. So those are, additional barriers that come into play as people explore this. So with that, Mitch, I will say if the general consensus is an interest in moving this forward towards public hearing, which is just one of the required steps for any zoning amendment, we wouldn't be able to do that until the first meeting in March because there's the notice requirements. But what I can do between now and the public hearing is start bringing this back at each of the meetings and continuing these discussions, bringing some sample language. I might work the intent, as you mentioned, because that is a little squishy and kind of gives some confusing messaging there. We can play around with there's some setbacks and look at all that. But yeah, if you're willing to do that, we'll bring it back and stay engaged between now and the public hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I concur that it's kind of an interesting scenario where and I remember watching that meeting, like it kind of just fell off, and that now we're in this scenario where those districts are R1 and R1B are very similar, and that's not really the intent. So yeah, I think it needs to move forward with us enacting,
I certainly agree with what everyone's saying, that we need to move this forward. I've been going up and down trying to find that sentence about architecturally.
It's at the very
Where
beginning.
is it? I know, I read it. What
right
page is it on?
For the very first
Keep
thing.
going, you got a few pages.
23.
Okay, scroll down, you passed it. So it's right here.
Ah,
So
there it is.
Before the actual sections start, it's just kind of like the chapter
I just think we
description.
need to have more discussion about that language, because it could be troublesome. And I don't know if the planning book or anything can come into play here, but I just would like to have further discussion about that. Several of us yesterday were at a strategic planning session for the city's strategic plan, and I think all of us can say that from all the public work that's gone into it so far, a little bit about the survey that's out there for everybody to fill in, overwhelmingly in every group that reported out that did the work yesterday, housing was like the topic that everybody mentioned. And it's very much in the public's mind. So for that reason alone, I think we have to move it forward, in my view, with a little more work. So, anybody else? Jackie?
Well, just to follow up on observations from yesterday's strategic planning session, there were preliminary collections of comments from the survey that's active right now, and a very important factor to those who had responded was small town charm and character of our community. And as I look at the R2 zones that would be impacted by this, I have significant concerns about character, which, as Brian pointed out, is in the eye of the beholder and is not well defined. But I believe that we are running a risk with being able to maintain the small town character in some areas that you know, are in neighborhoods that are primarily single-family right now,
Could you,
even though they're zoned R2.
could you give an example of a property?
I think that there are stretches of Fern Street, for instance, that would be, it's currently pretty diverse. There are there's a condominium at Fern and Center, but
So
there
which
are.
property would be out of place in the neighborhood if it went from a single-family home to a duplex?
Well, I'm not talking about a duplex, I'm talking about a fourplex. You know, it's currently R2. Any of those could become duplexes. My concern
Would
is
they?
for the fourplex. Yes, they could. Why wouldn't they?
They
Yeah.
could, but they wouldn't. My parents, I grew up on Fern Street,
Oh, okay.
so my parents feel a very particular way. They agree with you on a lot of this. Their neighbors agree, their neighbors agree, their neighbors agree. So like, we're talking about like when I inherit the property, like I might put a duplex or a quadplex there. That's a long time from now.
God willing.
Yeah. So
And-
it's
and-
not something that's gonna happen overnight.
Well, let's get more specific. There are still unbuilt lots along Fern
Sure.
Street also.
Yeah,
which
but-
And
could be
nothing's
impacted more.
changed after we passed all of this.
So, and
that's true.
therein begs the question too, you know, the size of the structure, whether it's a single-family home or quadplex, is limited to the same size. So if the structure from the outside looks the same, has it affected character? If I live with a family of 10 in a single-family home, or there's 4 one-person occupied units in the same structure, has that really altered character? And that's just, it's kind of like a rhetorical
No,
question.
yeah, it is a rhetorical
You
question.
know, because I
an
thought the mayor did a
unanswerable
good job
question at this
yesterday
point.
of bringing that
You
up
could give an
with
answer.
future IQ, is that, yeah, we've been hearing small town charm kicked around forever, but what does that mean? Is it defined by buildings? Is it defined by neighborhood connections? Is small town charm defined by, you know, people knowing who their neighbors are and stuff like that? And so I think that's where it gets a little tricky when we're trying to regulate small town charm, when the 13 people at this dais may have 13 different opinions of what small town charm actually is.
And I know we were going through this, I remember, I can't remember the exact number, but there was 400 and something multifamily units already existing in the neighborhoods. And some have been here for many, many years, but they look like a single-family home from the outside. So even when these multifamily units were being built, they were trying to retain the charm, whatever that means to somebody. But a lot of people have no idea, unless you count the mailboxes or you see multiple doors, that these are multifamily dwellings. So they exist, and we've been living around them for years and years. So,
Yeah, because
And we-
before, you know,
we have pictures
1978,
of it.
much of the R2 did allow 4 dwelling units, and R1 allowed 2 dwelling units. And in my strategic planning roundtable yesterday, I had a couple, they've lived in their house on 7th Street in the R2 for 33 years, and they're like, when we moved in, there was a mix of duplexes, single-family home, triplexes, and she's like, now they've all converted to single-family homes that no one in the community can actually afford anymore. She's like, when I moved here in the 1980s, I lived in a duplex in that same neighborhood until my husband and I bought this house. And so, you know, a lot of those opportunities that existed for the older generation when they were younger here, they don't exist for the younger generation anymore. I think that's ultimately, in terms of the context of housing, what the Planning Commission and what we've heard from the City Commission over the years have been working towards, so.
right?
So if you live in the neighborhood and it's a duplex or triplex or quadplex, you know that, okay? Now, walking by, you may not know, but it's really about the people who live in the community and the neighborhood. So I understand that. But at the same time, R2 is designed, its purpose is to be a more intense use. That's why it's 2 and not 1. And so while you may have single-family homes in an R2 district, it's been zoned R2 for a very long time. And if I have a home in a commercial district, I realize it's commercial. If and if I don't, then shame on me. Now, I understand a lot of people don't. They don't look at it. There's lots of opportunity for them. And once at this point in time, because of the cost of houses, moving is not always an option. But it's something to consider that, before you could have a duplex, now it's going to be a quadplex. Well, that is the change. So whether you want to make it more intense or not, or increase the setbacks for a triplex or a quadplex, it's kind of, that's a decision we can wrestle with going forward. But it is designed to be a more intense use, and it is designed to be multifamily. So not multifamily, but, and the lots are always going to be constrained by their size. So it's interesting to know what are the average lot sizes in our R2 districts, and is there a large variance in them? Are they 35-foot, are they all 50-foot lots? And a lot of 50-foot lots in some of these districts are most likely going to be, and a 50-foot lot is still, it's going to have to be a small house with very small units. And it's going to be on a 35-foot lot, it's going to be down a stretch like this. It's going to be a narrow house on the front, and it's just going to go down as far as it can. So,
Yeah, and that, we've had some people talk on some of these lots that would allow duplexes, even this gentleman who's looking at quadplexes, because of the shape of our lots, they become very difficult, especially over in Traverse Heights where his properties are. You don't have the alleys for rear access, so it's like, okay, with a narrow lot that has a lot of depth, how do I get 4 units and parking? Since we don't allow parking on the street overnight, how do I get them into
And a
that
driveway.
access? And it becomes a game of inches, really, working with them. And so there's plenty of times where they work on it and they're like, I just can't get it to pencil out. The will is there, but that's, again, one of those limiting factors where the site conditions may prevent the desired design from happening.
and some of these lots are so long, you could put 4 houses on them, and they would qualify as 4 individual lots.
That's
But
up- yeah.
because they're long and narrow, you can't. So, and we're restricting it to 2 buildings. So it makes sense. You have plenty of room, but these lots, some of these lots, especially over in Traverse Heights, are very, very long.
Yeah, Traverse Heights is an interesting neighborhood because, much of this side of the lake was platted by the Hand-on Lake Company, and so they applied like a very consistent platting to it, but there's a lot of different plats in Traverse Heights, so the street network is very different. We sometimes have alleys, we don't have alleys. There's quite a bit of variation, but we'd be happy to do that analysis and try to see what some of that is.
Jackie?
Can I ask about site condominiums within R2? Would that become more of an option, a more feasible option with this change in the zoning?
Yeah,
How often
so-
is it used, and how is it used?
Okay, so these are great questions. Condominiumizing a property, if that's even the right way to say it, it's not a land use, that's an ownership format. So the zoning ordinance doesn't regulate that. In fact, the Condo Act of the state regulates how that works. So yes, they can be site condoed. In fact, across the street from me, I have 2 duplexes, so 4 dwelling units. They've all been condoed. So each is owner occupied. They own the unit that they own. And the one couple, they own now 2 breweries here in town. And they were like, this was the perfect size for us and the price point that we could afford while also starting these businesses. So, that was an example of it gave them the option. If they were restricted to only buying the whole house, which the emergency room nurse from Munson lives in the unit next door, they wouldn't be living in my neighborhood because they couldn't ever afford that whole property. But having half a property not only met their needs, but was in their budget. So yeah, by allowing these uses, you may allow for other options of home ownership at lower price points. And that's how you start. I mean, like my wife and I, right? Our first property was a condo in a 12-unit, 3-story old building in Richmond, right? And it was like 700 square feet. But that got our foot in the door, And it was bought in 2007. Not a great time to buy a condo. We had to hold on to it for 10 years before it got out from underwater. But, we learned a lot. Had we not had that option, we wouldn't have gone through that. So.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments? Do we have any public comments on increasing the density of R2? Hello, Mai.
Hello. Mai Stanley, city resident, and I want to thank the Planning Commission for, particularly those of you who brought up the fact that this was sort of a loose end that was left by the City Commission. So thank you for closing the loop on this topic that was left unresolved. As this is being presented currently with no changes to the setbacks or the size of the structure for a quadplex versus a duplex, or the number of structures per parcel, I think this seems like a very reasonable approach to take to help provide another tool to potentially give some additional housing stock in our community, which we know we're very strapped for. Every week, it seems like I'm talking to a friend or a community member who is quitting a job, leaving the area because their rent has increased. They're having to commute long distances because they cannot afford to live anywhere within 35 miles of Traverse City. And these are folks who work in the healthcare profession, who are mental health providers. We're not talking about folks coming here, straight out of college. These are people with good careers, good jobs, but not good enough to get in the door of the housing in Traverse City. So I would also say that if changing the number of households within a residence from 2 to 4 is a threat to our small town charm, I think that charm is partly about being a welcoming and a hospitable place to be, and that sounds more like gatekeeping. So I appreciate that this body sounds like they're going to move this forward, and thank you for all of your hard work as a volunteer board. I sure appreciate you all being here on a cold, blustery January night.
And you too. Thanks. Any other public comment on this? Step forward, state your name, please, and address.
Bill Manning, 905 Bay Street, Traverse City, Michigan. So, in a nutshell, I was an owner-occupied duplex owner for 30, 35 years. And I no longer own that property, but when I moved out of that property and still owned it, I constantly got, not constantly, but quite often I got complaints from the neighbors about tenants. Was it my choice of the tenants? So by increasing this intensity, putting 4 units on what was originally R2 property, people just need to be aware that there could be some interruption in their daily lives or their privacies and things like that if they choose to stay with single-family dwellings. Also, thinking that this is going to make more affordable housing into Traverse City, we just, a month or 2 ago, we were here on the Sheffer Collett property. And the gentlemen that are planning on building that structure over there specifically said, well, and some of the questions from the committee were, well, what about affordability? And at the cost per square foot, people are still not going to be able to afford these things if the developers or the landowners are going to have rents that will satisfy the expenses of the properties. One other comment on that, and Mai just said something just about it, and I bring this up every time. Do people not want to live 30 miles away, buy something, build equity, and move up? Everybody just wants to come in to wherever right away at something they can afford. I don't know where you people come from, but I came from down here, and I've moved up the ladder through hard work and equity. So those are just some of my comments. I have questions, but this isn't the time for the questions.
Thank you.
Hi, all. Katie Bertato, Traverse City resident. Thanks for all your hard work on this. I do support this proposal, and I just wanted to say from personal experience, my owner-occupied duplex in Central Neighborhood, which had been there for a very long time, allowed me to raise my boys in Central Neighborhood in a place that I otherwise would not have been able to afford. So, full support, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Paul McCarthy, 401 Washington. I could put another unit on the market tomorrow if this went through, and that's what I would do. So I'm in full support of this. It would require no changes to structures at all. It would just be allowing an accessory dwelling unit to be rented. Affordable because you can't charge that much for something so small. Thank you.
You have a comment on the R2, sir? Yes, yes.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
moved
we
ours
did.
last year, sorry.
Well, that actually worked out for me then.
Welcome.
Real efficient meeting for you.
Welcome.
Pop
Yeah.
in during public comment, pop out.
Thank you. John Stimson with Homestretch. We work in Traverse City. We also work all around Grand Traverse County, contiguous counties, Antrim, Benzie, Leelanau. And I'm in support of the change from R2 to doubling it to 2 structures in the R2 district, only along the commercial corridor. And we were successful in getting a rezoning 2 years ago now for Carver Street across from Dewey's Hardware. Really beneficial to step it down from the commercial use to the single family. It makes a lot of sense to us. It also makes sense in the standpoint of infrastructure, because there's infrastructure cost that's been put in, and if we can benefit from that or maximize that cost, we're actually making housing more affordable. And one problem that we've had in most of our developments outside of the city is we can't get the infrastructure to build more than 8 or 12 units. And we'd love to do 32 or more, but for water and sewer. We can put in a well, but we can only have 25 people on the well. It's problematic, and it's costly to even do those private facilities. But in the city, I think it's appropriate. In this case, especially so because it's along that commercial corridor. We do have one property on Fern Street that we are under development right now, or actually we got a grant from the state. And I made 5 copies just to give to you to show the example of the duplex up front and the potential for another duplex in back.
Thank you.
And John, is this what you had emailed me? Okay, so if you want to hand it out to the planning commissioners to share, I can then email to you too what he had sent me digitally, so you all have your own copy.
And that we're embarking upon. The second page shows 2 more, one more. And it also shows the massing of the structure isn't egregious, because they would be keeping, so that's what our preferred plan would be, but right now
Thank you. Any other comments on the R2 from the public?
Fern Street. I just said, Fern Street.
Oh, Fern
We
Street,
were already
yes.
talking about Fern
Yes.
tonight.
Is this who you're talking about?
What is the address?
Well, you said Fern
1020.
Street, you never provided addresses or blocks that you were
This
talking about.
likely is the open, it's a long, narrow, and a
So-
site condominium next to it, as I recall. Yeah.
1027.
No, I'm not seeing any state condos.
I'm sorry, it's the next one up that has 3 structures. I think those are site condos.
No, they're not.
Any other comments on the R2 from us? One thing I would like to say as we go forward is considering these smaller units, you can't assume who might move in them. So we have a problem, the whole country has a problem, not just our town, in that we have older citizens who are living in large homes and can't move because they're worried about what a new house is cost, what's going to happen to their mortgage, what's going to happen to capital gains taxes. And that's part of the problem that we're facing in the housing shortage in the country, let alone here. So one of the things we talked about yesterday is, could there be incentives provided? Let's say you have a widow who's living in a house where she raised 4 children and she feels she can't move. Can there be incentives provided for her to move? And she may be the person that moves into a duplex or a quadplex. And I just want people to remember that you can't, in your head, conjure up who's going to be in these things. And I think it would be very helpful to a lot of people who feel stuck if something like that can happen, and would help open up more housing. So that's just a comment I wanted to make. If there are no other comments, then I think we'll move on to, what are we on? Planning Commission goals, correct? Planning Commission goals.
Yeah, so as you guys know, Leslie has kind of been leading this discussion, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to her to build off of what we were discussing at the last meeting.
Yes, thank you.
So I made this really easy on myself, and I pretty much went through my notes and really just saw that the major change that we talked about at your last meeting was to add a goal toward improving lines of communication, and that would be in all directions, with the public, with staff, with the city commission, among the planning commission. So I did add that in, and then really kept the other goals that we've been talking about and that are also called for in the action plan, under the master plan. And then the 2 ordinances, or 2 other initiatives that are in process right now, both updates to the short-term rental ordinance and to the riparian buffer ordinance. So really, unless I missed something and didn't have good notes last time, just kind of looking for if we're on the right track, and then we can bring this back and incorporate it into your annual plan as well, or annual report.
The part that you'll incorporate into the annual report will just be like the numbered goals, right? Not any of the bullets.
It's going to be very condensed.
Yeah. Great.
If that's what you're getting at, yes.
It was, yes. I was like, Katie has a tiny little spot over here. What can she fit in here? And also, like, if you start getting into the points, it gets too convoluted, and people
like the
will
priority
follow
2
along
and the
with
priority
that
3
if they
and-
want.
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It looks great to me. It looks exactly like what we discussed. Does
Yep.
anybody see any differences from what we talked about?
May I ask an informational question? This is not different from what we talked about, but I just wondered, in terms of the development zone along 14th Street, part of our prior conversation, I think, was that was timing-wise quite far down the line, and I am wondering whether do we want to include that right now, if indeed we won't be able to take action for an extended period of time. I also wondered, just for my information, is a development zone considered commercial in terms of accommodating short-term rentals and TIF financing?
So that would be determined by the Planning Commission, whether, let me give you an example. So when the City Planning Commission looked at D2, which was along 8th Street as part of that whole reconstruction, they rezoned the north side to D2, which matched the south side, which was D2, but they made a slew of regulations, including limiting short-term rentals to 25% in that D district, as well as some dimensional standards, setbacks above 45 feet for buildings and things of that nature. So really, that's ultimately what you all would have to decide, what you want to recommend forward on that. Now, in terms of the street being reconstructed, being a number of years out, I don't think there's any harm in starting the conversation now. Ideally, what you would want to do is have your preferred land use regulations in place when the construction starts. Because as we've seen before, oftentimes development follows that private or that public investment in the infrastructure. I mean, John was talking about infrastructure just a few minutes ago. So you want to make sure you have the development regulations to move towards the desired future in place at the right time. What you don't want to do is start it after the street has been reconstructed. Then you're playing catch up the whole time. So that being said, I think to your point, Jackie, the conversation could start now. It doesn't necessarily have to be finished this year. You know, there may be, maybe we bring it back every quarter or something like that and be like, okay, let's kind of build off it. Let's keep the conversation going because, you know, every district operates within the context of the whole community, right? So there may be changes in the community as we go through the next couple of years that may influence how 14th Street should serve the community. So that's kind of the thought on that.
I don't know if this helps you at all, Jackie, but when I was reading it and looking at it, I was involved in D2 on 8th Street, and it felt too late that we were like looking at that and trying to implement changes. It felt like we were behind. So I was thinking about this one in the frame of like, what is an optimal D2 district, and would that fit on 14th? Or do we create a D3 because we don't think it's comparable to 8th Street? I was just thinking like purely about conceptually, what would this look like and how would we define that? Like what Sean said, just very early stages thinking about what it would look like to maybe start to lay some of that groundwork so that we're not so far behind later on.
Yeah, and the master plan recommended a D district, because we have 3 of them right now, and they exist in areas that were primed for redevelopment. So the mill, the depot, and what's the other one, like Gillis Street area. No, sorry, the old iron works, so where the Haggerty is now. That's the other one. So 14th Street kind of fits that, like it's poised for redevelopment, but through the discussions of the Planning Commission, you may want to create a whole new commercial district, a C district that fits it. That's why those conversations should maybe start now to lay out some of the expectations, the goals, and the objectives. You know, the Envision 8th Street plan called for form-based code, and I think that may be one reason why the Planning Commission felt a little behind, because they went down that road only to come to the fact that, you know, wait, this isn't the best fit, so let's modify the existing D2 instead of creating this whole new zoning structure, you know. And that's how this process works, you know. It's iterative, it takes time, and things of that nature. So, yeah, it's ultimately up to you where and how fast you want to take that.
Yeah, and speaking to the iterative nature, there are 3 different corridors that are going to get, or slated for rezoning under priority 3, and 14th Street as the third one of those 3 is not necessarily happening first, and it might not, we might only get through one of those this year. And yes, they have some commonalities, but each one should be handled in turn and can give us a little more clarity for when we do the next one.
Correct. We know things take a long time.
If I could suggest that the conversation here maybe isn't a great fit with the way it's stated. I mean, this is a very positive, we'll establish a development zone along 14th Street. That's the decision. And what I'm hearing is that it's a lot more open-ended than that and more conceptual. And I just would like to be sure that the language supports the intent.
Yeah, and I think what Leslie has done here is taken word for word from the plan, which is prescriptive in its nature. But as far as adopting your goals and keeping with the truncated condensed, it's probably just going to say, you know, explore zoning potential along 14th Street. You know, that's what I imagine would go in your adopted plan or your adopted goals for the year.
So, in theory, we could eventually come up with like a D4 for that area, like specific to. Okay, because I remember, with 8th Street, a lot of that happened. I think the street was already done.
Yes, it was.
Oh yeah, it was well done. And that's the thing. there is a trend, and I'd even say a push in some regards across this profession of condensing zoning districts, right? Like, just like how people that live in this area don't necessarily pay attention to geopolitical boundaries, right? Traverse City is a brand. They all live in Traverse City. Like, people don't pay attention necessarily to zoning districts, and so they may see something that is built, that has been allowed to be built for 85 years, that seems out of scale, but nothing else until then was built. And so it kind of creates this. So by condensing them, you almost create a little more predictability because you have less variation in the districts throughout the city. So, that conversation may lead the city planning commission to say, hey, maybe we don't need a fourth D district. Maybe we need to consolidate these all into one D district and make them more consistent. Because it is, from our perspective as administrators of the zoning ordinance, it's weird that just D2 of all the Ds have that 25% call out on short-term rentals, but all the others have more, and so that's where it'd be nice to get these conversations going so we can start fleshing these things out, because a lot of times it can feel like pulling a thread on a sweater. We might start talking about 14th Street and it leads us to the Depot neighborhood, and maybe what do we want to do different there? Or maybe we want to think about the context of Garfield as another key corridor and stuff. So, yeah, that's all I got on that.
Interesting. Mitch?
Yes, this wasn't in part of our prior discussions, but it did come up at the city commission meeting last night. And it's, I'd say, in line with some of our previous goals and previous action, that being parking regulations. We've, maybe not the people behind this desk right now, but over the past several years, the Planning Commission has significantly reduced or even eliminated parking minimums for many commercial and residential uses, but it did come up that we do have requirements under special land use permits. This was specifically in the case of the SLUP for Safe Harbor, when as part of money that the city is allocating, it will be going to paving their parking lot. Those discussions showed that wouldn't necessarily be possible to reform the parking regulations for that specific SLUP, but it does spark interest in my mind to seeing where do we require parking that we might want to take a look at, because we don't need to require parking when an applicant doesn't necessarily need that added parking. And we could also look at flexibility for paving material or parking material. Currently, if an area is going to be used for parking, it has to be paved or otherwise essentially treated as impervious surface. But there could be opportunities that if you use pervious pavers or have a geotextile with grass growing through it, that it could handle the action of a car driving on it just fine, but wouldn't contribute to stormwater.
Are you suggesting that you want this as another goal, then?
Potentially. It didn't, I mean, it's another thing, but it seems narrow enough in scope and can build off of prior actions that we've taken.
What do the rest of you think? Do you want to add?
You're talking specifically parking minimums?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's bite-sized enough.
Yes, it is. There was a bite-sized.
Yeah, I think
area
it's
in here.
bite-sized enough, and I think that we could couple it with another conversation. Like, so that it's not entirely standalone, requiring a lot of research.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first to say there is no science at all to how parking requirements are calculated. The APA, American Planning Association, has a great book, a document, it's reference, look at for parking, and they talk about different uses, and they look at a bunch of different cities, and they're just reporting out, and the variation is drastic. Now, in some cases, you can take into account, like when they throw Seattle in there, like, well, they also have robust public transit and rail. There's other options, so people aren't always relying on vehicles. But yeah, I mean, within this city, we haven't had any required parking in the downtown district for 40 years, if not more at this point. We don't have any required parking for residential uses. We've yet to have a residential application come through our department that didn't have parking, right? But they're right-sizing the parking for their need rather than being told the amount they have to have. And in prior discussions last year, some planning commissioners thought we did get rid of parking requirements already, because of the past conversations that we've had. So I think it'd be worth, jumping into, to Mitch's point, it came up yesterday, right? As a kind of a conflict point in the process, and all we can do as members of the executive branch is follow the policy that the legislative branch, the city commission, has put into effect. And so the city commission adopted the regulations for the emergency shelters, and it includes how parking will be determined, and so we have to follow that policy. So we can put forth changes to that, and if the city commission supports it, they can enact it. But yeah, I think it's very finite in scope, and I think it'd be easy to kind of dive into. I mean, we're acting like fools saying parking's easy because
Well, it's
we've all
parking
banged our
minimums.
heads on tables most of our careers dealing with parking because of the fact that there is no science to it.
But it does seem small enough that
Yes.
we could add parking minimums. So let's do that. Brian, did you have something to say?
You can reduce the minimums all you want. You can eliminate it in commercial districts. It's always going to be dependent on the purchaser of the property. Any commercial property owner or developer that I've ever known, the first thing they want is parking. We are still they want parking. If they're downtown, then the lack of parking is a complaint, but it's something they consider, but it turns off a lot of people. They don't want to be in that system. They want to have people ability to drive there or park there. They want some parking. The parking is always an issue for everyone outside the downtown. So, and it's just gonna, it's like if you want to, if you want to really make it controversial, lower the maximums. That'll get people that'll get people knocking on your door. But it's and if you want to change what's allowed, I'd be if you start going to gravel and dust, it just starts raising a lot of issues with people.
Yeah, and we would probably bring a draft like that through our design team to get the other departments' comments on it to feed back to you, because I know even gravel parking, yes, gravel is pretty much impervious because they intentionally put clay in there to hold it
That's
together. But even though it's impervious, it still has runoff of fines. And Zach from engineering spoke about that a couple weeks ago, right? He's like, yes, it's impervious, but it still runs a lot of silt out, and that adds turbidity to our surface waters and stuff like that. So there's a reason we try not to encourage gravel. Again, many people kind of lean to it thinking it's impervious, but it really isn't unless you buy specific, like our zoning administrator has a gravel driveway with specific drain stone that's black for that purpose, And it's expensive. He has a very, very small driveway, so it made sense. But, you wouldn't do a huge parking lot in that. I was talking to Mitch earlier. I know I'm curious to watch the new brewery at Cass and South Airport that they put in. It's kind of a modern-looking black building. I don't know if you noticed the parking lot, but they put that geogrid pattern of plastic down that holds gravel in like little cups and stuff. My brother was the project manager on the construction of that, of the building, not the site. So he was like, yeah, there was a lot of people on that site being like, I don't know how that's going to hold up with the metal plow in the wintertime, but that was them testing an alternative, and we're going to learn from it, right? Like, they took the risk, but we get to learn from watching how it holds up and stuff and see if it's actually a good feasible one. Now, in some cases, we do get instances where people want to use pavers that have the grass come through, so it just looks like grass. More often than not, they want to use that to meet the requirements for the fire lane access. Some buildings have to, there's a whole fire code beyond what this group looks at. And a lot of times the fire department won't support it because inevitably people don't plow them in the winter. And they're like, well, if a fire comes out in the winter, we can't use the emergency lane because they don't want to plow grass, So there's other variables that come into play, of course, when we have these conversations. I've seen things. One community that I worked in, they got rid of their minimums, switched to maximums, but they did build in a thing where you could exceed the maximum, but it had to be impervious or the grass pavers or something like that. Another thing, this would be a potential recommendation of the Planning Commission, because it's a police power ordinance, but we don't allow parking overnight on our streets, right? We can't develop our right-of-way. We can only develop the lots. So as we think, to Anna's point, about the intentionality of how we use our land, most of our streets are constructed at 36 feet curb to curb. That is the dimension for parking on both sides and 2 travel lanes. Now, yes, it would be nice to have narrower streets, but it's going to take 50 years to get all those streets narrower. Could we utilize that impervious surface to park the cars? It's already existing, because right now what we're saying is you can't park there overnight, so please add additional impervious surface in the city on your lot that is not covered by the stormwater ordinance to park that car. Do not park it in front. So these are those things. In the past, they did not allow parking overnight because they did street sweeping at night. They don't do it at night anymore. They do it during the day, so that conflict kind of goes away. Towns in our area, even for snow plowing, Petoskey allows parking at night, but they have the signs every other day. You have to alternate at night so that they can plow. We do have streets in the city that are very narrow, 9th Street, Elmwood. A lot of them during the winter months, you can only park on one side so the plows can come through. So just planting that seed as you think about the parking topic and solutions and, where do we have existing space to park cars? Because Brian's right, we are a driving community, right? Like many of our businesses downtown, as much as we want everything to be walkable, the market that exists within a walkable radius of downtown isn't a big enough market to support those businesses. Like they need to rely on people coming in as patrons, and we've been hearing more and more. We heard it today, right? Well, if you're a worker, move 30 miles out of town. Well, then you need to park to come to work, right?
Yeah, right.
So that's what people are dealing with right now. So parking will always exist, no matter how idealistic we want the community to be, parking is a reality. There are cautionary tales when you eliminate parking. One example is pedestrian malls. So the first pedestrian mall in America was actually in Kalamazoo, so they closed it down to streets and stuff. And then about just over 200 of them proliferated throughout. 90% of them failed because those existed in areas that people still needed to rely on driving to get to, and just the perception that they then couldn't get close to it. They're like, well, if I can't even get close to my destination because the street is closed to vehicles downtown and I'm already in my car, well, wow, doesn't Meijer look like a more convenient option all of a sudden to run my errand, And so the businesses all started failing around there. And I bring that up because sometimes you hear things thrown out there about like, what if we close Front Street to traffic? Like, I'd be cautious about that. There's a slew of data of where that has failed across the country. So just kind of keep that in mind. But yeah, parking, about it.
I'm not going to support adding parking to it for the simple reason is we've been working on our goals now. We spent a month on it or 2 or 3 meetings on it last year, and now we're in, we've already spent 2 more meetings on it, and we'll spend 3 meetings on it now, and that should be a very small bite. We don't have small bites at the Planning Commission. And you start adding a bunch of small bites, and we've got a lot of things that are priorities for us. And personally, it's like why I voted to, and I said this when I think I was in the commission, we eliminated the minimums for residential. And at the time, I said, it's not going to make a difference. People who build houses or own homes are still going to add parking if they can. And almost every residential lot in the city has space for parking. So it's going to happen. And for me, it's just adding something that's going to have very little impact, but take up our time. And it takes us, and it's hard for us to stay focused and get through projects. We're going to do this little bite, which we thought about putting this back out for, for the R2 district, and we're going to talk about it at least 1 or 2 more meetings, and won't have a public hearing on it until March, and that assumes other things don't land on our plate. That pushes it into April or May. It's little bites they don't exist here. We don't have little bites. Everything requires discussion, meetings, and you start taking too many little bites and we start losing track of other things. So
I think that's
It's
my
a valid
position.
point.
Yeah, last year we had 3 things, right, on the goals list, and 2 of them are still carrying over. Little bites aren't really little bites. So what about this? I still think it's a valid topic to talk about. I think there's enough here, more than enough, to keep the planning commission full for this year that has been presented. So what if we let the parking lie for now? One thing I mentioned to Mitch, because this was brought up at the city commission meeting yesterday, the parking thing, is the city commission, if that's their will, they can initiate a zoning amendment at any time. You know, it can come from them, and then you're forced to do it, because you have an application before you. So you could let them take the lead on that topic, as opposed to deferring some of these priorities, spinning your wheels for 6 months on the parking topic, send it up to them, and they do nothing with it, or they turn it, like, let them take the lead and provide the direction, because
I like that idea.
parking's
I like that.
I really
not
like that
a
idea.
low-profile topic in this community, so no sense in,
I think
They
that's
meet
an
4
excellent
times a
idea.
month. They get paid for their time.
that is true.
Very well, if I recall.
They
So
get
for-
treated by respect by all members of the public every day,
Yes.
right?
So for clarity, they could initiate, we would still do the legwork, it would come to us, and then it would go back.
Yeah, because we still, all zoning amendments have to follow the same process outlined
Yeah.
by law, so it has to, they can apply or initiate, the act says, but then it comes to the planning commission first, they hold the public hearing, they look at the master plan for any insights, and then they make a recommendation, and then ultimately the city commission makes the decision, so.
Yeah, that's how the tree ordinance happened several years ago.
Yep.
I like that. Great idea.
Yeah.
Anything else on the goals? They seem to be set now. Yes, Jackie?
I really support what Brian had to say about fewer and bigger and maintaining our focus. What would happen if we ended our list of goals for 2025 after item number 4, short-term rental?
Could I suggest maybe having the 2025 list and then the springboard into 2026? I hate to see things fall off the list and get forgotten, or something take, leapfrog over it the following year. Because there are certain things that had been on the list for a long time, and those got higher priority. And so if this, still had a little bit of a legacy, I think that would help them not get lost.
Also, we don't know what challenges or opportunities may come
Yeah.
up
We don't.
over the next
If
11
there were
months.
a grant opportunity or something, I think we're better positioned if it's still on our list than if it were completely gone from the list.
If goals are something that we're holding ourselves responsible for actually accomplishing,
Well,
then-
I'll back up, because
Okay.
I want to add context to that. Every year we have this discussion, right? Because we don't know what's going to come before us. So our goals are a North Star. It helps us stay focused. It helps you all channel the direction. So Mitch, I'm just going to put you on the spot just as an example, but like when Mitch brought up the parking, Brian was able to say, hey, we have enough on our plate right now. It helps ground you guys, but like Brian said, we don't know what's going to come. We could have 4 PUDs this year come before us, and none of this gets moved, and that's no one's fault. That's just the reality of the situation. So I think at best, these are
aspirational?
aspiration. It gives us direction, yeah.
Gives
But,
you- yeah, it gives you
I mean, like, for instance, the riparian buffer, right? That's taken a long time, and only because it's been very difficult to get the people on that committee to all agree on a date that they can meet. So our meetings have been spaced, and so that has nothing to do with the planning commission's, desire to see it through. That's logistics, and that's just how it works out sometimes. So I just want to point that out, is like, we do our best to maintain on those goals. This is now my 4th year, and I've looked through the ones before. They've never all been done in a year, because, in the absence of any applications or anything coming down the pipe from the city commission, this would probably be very doable. But
The master
it's probably not
plan-
going to happen that way.
The master plan ended up taking 6 months longer than when we initially went out for contract and said, okay, this is the timeline.
Yeah.
And also, I think that the goal list is a little longer because 2 of those goals are in progress and could be finished quicker than longer. So,
2 months.
I really like Leslie's concept of having sort of a holding place
Yeah.
for things that perhaps we recognize may not get action on, but
Exactly.
don't let them get lost
Yeah.
entirely.
Yeah, because even if you look back at the list, I mean, 2, 3, and 4 are all carryovers, you know? So the work, to Brian's point, there is no little bites, right? Like, we might think of it as a little bite, but, oh, look, this topic actually took us 8 months when we thought it'd take us 2. You know, that's just the reality. So I think we're going to do our best, like we always do, but we just know that there are limitations. I like your comment.
Okay, are you all good with the direction is there any public comment on the goals of the Planning Commission? Great. I have a question. Does anybody want to take a quick break? Because I keep seeing people running back and forth. Does anybody need a quick break before we do them?
I'd go for
Let's take like a 3-minute break. I know what I have to do, so.
That means you gotta go bust a square.
Are there half of that time would be going down to the lot.
I'm gonna go to Rarebird.
Yeah.
Maybe he was worse. Maybe.
How's Ashley doing, Jerry?
Like, I'm gonna do it anyway. I don't care if you're gonna let me cry.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, she's very.
young
She's
still.
stubborn and.
How old
But
is she?
she-
4 months, 5 months?
No, she's 6 months. She'll be 6 months at the end of this month. We're getting close though. Like she's had multiple nights where she's slept all the way through the night,
Oh, well,
and like
there you
wakes
go.
up at 5, takes a bottle, and goes back to sleep.
Not even one night a month.
Not even one night a month. But nevertheless, like she is a pretty good sleeper. She, will take a bottle. It's getting her to that point where she goes to sleep and stays asleep.
It's the staying asleep.
That can be really difficult.
She just got too much energy.
I don't know. It's
They
just
like the attention.
yeah,
They wake up, they want the attention.
Are you talking about children?
Yes.
She will be fully asleep for like hour and a half. Wakes up, eyes totally closed, screaming at the top of her lungs, and we're like going in there, but her eyes are so. She's like dreaming or having a nightmare or
Oh my
something, and
gosh.
you're like patting her, like.
Yeah, just pat her and leave.
And she does go to sleep. Go to sleep.
We moms, we know.
Have you asked
But-
her parents if you did that?
No. I have
That
not.
might be.
But she'll do it like 3 times.
Is everybody back? Who's not back?
Jerry went to the
Okay,
restroom.
Jerry.
And you don't have a city commission?
We're on
Number
we're on
4.
bylaws, right?
Yep.
Let me get that up.
Do you ever do the split screen?
How do you do that?
This is, I don't know why.
I
it took me
hate
3
it.
years. Oh, you hate it?
Yeah, I
Because
refuse.
It can be tough.
It leaves the
I just don't like
agenda
it,
here,
it's too
And
much.
then whenever you click
I
on
zoom in,
something, it
so I don't
brings
have
it
Yeah.
like any space,
Yep.
and then I
I
just have my
realize how
notes on the
small
side.
Union Township
But next to it, you mean?
Yeah.
But
How
it
do you
didn't.
close that?
Which is
I
small.
don't know. I don't know what you
Union
just did.
Township.
I don't know either.
There
Okay.
you go.
So like when I click on mine,
Who is Union Township?
right
Is
here.
that Acme?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then it's all right there, and then you can just go to the next agenda item. Not have to like scroll all the way to the top and stuff.
Oh,
So it's one of
great.
those.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for showing me that.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, that's way over
And we're
there.
all back
Yeah, yeah,
now? So we're going to move on to the next item, which is the continuing discussion on bylaws.
Yeah, so again, at the first meeting of the year, as usual, we put forth the bylaws to see if there's any changes, just give you the opportunity. It's not mandated that you guys change anything. There were a couple discussions that unfolded as part of that, including the number of planning commissioners. There was discussion of possibly 9 down to 7. Also, the number of city commissioners serving on the planning commission, so we have 2 at this point. We had a conversation about ex officio members, so no more than 1/3 of your planning commission can be ex officio, and there's 3 categories of ex officio members. You could be a member of the elected body, so that would be Mitch and Jackie. You could be the chief administrative officer or their designee, so that would be the city manager, or in this case, their designee is Jerry. Prior to that, it was Chief Tuller. So that is a total of 3 ex officio members on a 9-person board. So that's the max that you can have on that. The third category of ex officio is a member who is not a resident of the community, but is a registered voter somewhere else. And I gave you the example in Acme, where they had a member of the tribe on their commission. The tribe has pretty vast land holdings there, and furthermore, this individual was an architect, so he was able to bring his knowledge of building trades and stuff to the conversation. So on the topic of ex officio, there was various viewpoints going around, so we were asked to do some research. There was a topic of, or the discussion about, should we have someone outside the city to kind of bring that regional context within here. And if you were at the strategic planning yesterday, you'll notice on the data, there's a lot of like using a regional approach to governing and stuff. Because as the planning commissioner mentioned at our last meeting, we're not operating by ourselves. We're part of a larger ecosystem here in Northwest Michigan. So I had mentioned that the county, which no longer has a planning commission or planning department, has created a new position and hired someone. They're the community development coordinator. And so there was some interest in whether that person could serve, because that person is doing that kind of work throughout the county with all the townships. He's on the committee for the Beach District and East Bay Township and stuff like that, with the intent of them being ex officio. So I did talk to the city attorney, and so she put a memo in there. She said it's fine to go ahead and add someone. You would do that the same way as you would probably have done the student liaison. So if you remember in 2022, we were approached by Government for Tomorrow about bringing a student on board, recognizing that most students who would serve are not 18, therefore they could not vote. So we made them a non-voting member, so it just was entered into the bylaws. They could have full rights to participate in discussions and serve on committees, they just couldn't vote. So she said that you could do someone from the county, this individual, in the same way. I've spoken to that individual as well as their bosses, and their bosses are open to considering it if that's the direction the Planning Commission would want to go. I mean, personally, I think there's a lot of valid reasons to have that perspective just at the table and part of the conversations, because there's programs that could be beneficial to goals of the Planning Commission or goals of applicants that are here that the county runs that we just don't know about. So like, for instance, are you familiar with the PACE program? So that is a program that the county runs to help fund green energy improvements and efficiency improvements within projects. That's not for us to operate, so I'm not knowledgeable of it. But if having that kind of perspective, I think, could add value to projects within the greater scheme of what the commission's trying to achieve. So with that, I want to add one other point, and that is, if you remember last year, I guess I'm going to have a couple points, but we reorganized the bylaws because, you know, it was really choppy. Here it was talking about membership, over here it was talking, so we consolidated it. When we did that, we must have been using an older copy that did not have the language about the student liaison in that. So I put it back in, and it's in red so you can see it, but that's already in the bylaws. For some reason, again, I think just an oversight in the copy and paste. That was never the intention. Now, we don't have a student right now. You probably noticed that.
Yeah, what happened with that?
Well, that darn kid from Government for Tomorrow went to college, you know?
Yeah, it was
It's like,
so good.
they haven't really like followed up. I don't know what's happening with that organization. And we really relied on them for taking applications, reviewing them, vetting them, making recommendations. So we'll still kind of reach out with that organization, see where they are. The last time I talked to him via email, he's like, well, I'll be back in college next week. Let me check my schedule. And that was 4 months ago. So
They're kind of in the midst of reorganization, I
yeah,
think. with
he
this
pretty much was the
He was the
organization. And now with him gone at college, the few other people around are trying to figure out how to manage this because he was a go-getter, right?
He
I
was
mean, he was from Charlevoix
unbelievable.
coming to all these night meetings as a high school kid, selling his wares,
he was
and
great.
we bought it. And it was great. We've had 2 great student liaisons, frankly, in my perspective here at the Planning Commission. So with that, I'll just turn it back to you. No action today, but continue the conversations. Actually, if we go up, you will see in addition to Lauren's memo, we contacted the neighboring jurisdictions throughout the county. So yeah, if you'll look, most of them are 7 planning commissions. There are 9. We separate them by color. So purple are the cities in our region. The yellow are the townships in our county. The blue are the 2 villages within our county. And then Grand Traverse and Leelanau County. Grand Traverse County doesn't have, as I mentioned, a planning commission, so it's kind of an empty data point. So we threw Leelanau in there to see. Now, typically, county planning commissions are large. They don't regulate land use, though. If we had a county planning commission, whenever townships want to do a zoning amendment, after the planning commission, before the city commission, they have to send it to the county planning commission to make sure it's within, you know, the broader county vision of how all the municipalities connect and things like that. So, yep, that's where we are.
Okay, so if I remember from our last discussion, and let me know if you think differently now that you've had some time to think about it, the number of commissioners, we weren't really too concerned about changing the numbers, like from 9 to 7. Are we still feeling that? Okay, so I don't think we need to talk about that. So then that leads us to the composition of whether, and thank you, by the way, for Shay and Jackie for sending your points in for us to look at. So the composition right now with the 2 city commissioners is one topic to discuss, and then the other topic to discuss is bringing on this county ex officio member. So what are everybody's thoughts here? Brian?
Bring on the county ex officio member as a non-voting member, if that position is willing to serve, and that's it. The rest is just, the city commission wants to change the makeup. Other than that, that's their prerogative, not ours. And we are a weak planning commission. Nothing we do, almost nothing we do is final. I mean, if you look at other planning commissions around the state, and I've been exposed to a lot of them, we probably have the least review or where our decisions are final. Other places, planning commissions make final decisions on a number of issues. We don't. And so I just see it, you might as well keep 2 of the members that are going to be on the deciding body on. And it's their prerogative anyways. So that's my position.
One question I want to ask is in the act it says it should be 5, the planning commission should be 5, 7, or 9 members. It doesn't say voting members. It just says 5, 7, or 9 members. So I'm wondering if we add this person and now it makes a 10th member, is that an issue?
No, and I talked to Lauren about that, the city
Okay.
attorney, because that was the same issue with the city or the student liaison,
Oh,
because that
okay,
put us
so-
at 10.
all right.
You want an odd number of voting members, so you can't have a tie
Right,
if
yes,
everyone's
of course,
present. So, but the non-voting don't affect that, so she said it
Yeah.
is still compliant with the law if you have that since they don't vote. She did recommend, if you read her memo, is perhaps we use a different term if we want to go that way than ex
Yes.
officio, because the act already describes ex officio as
Yes,
meaning
yes.
something. So she looked around, liaison is a good word. We use that for student liaison. We could call it county liaison or regional liaison, or, some communities just call it the non-voting member. It could be as generic as that. So that's a little granular. We can work on that more in the future once the direction gets established.
Okay, that's not a problem. Okay, Mitch.
Yes. I am fine with keeping the number at 9 of voting members. I'd say, if anything, it would make sense to increase, since in terms of how many residents there are per commissioner, we have the second largest number of constituents, so to speak, and most municipalities have significantly fewer constituents per commissioner. But if it says 5, 7, or 9, then 9 is the number that we're going with. I definitely like the idea of having a liaison from an entity that isn't the city, but I would be more favorable to language that is intentionally vague, to provide a little more flexibility, say in the future if the county decided to terminate that specific position, or the county became less willing, then say Networks Northwest is also a regional entity that deals with planning and would have eyes on many different things.
Yeah, I think one solution to that, Mitch, I think we have to have some degree of specificity to move forward. I think if a change occurred, like the county wasn't willing, the bylaws you could change in a single meeting. So I think,
yeah. And then it would be just here, and it wouldn't have to go to.
exactly, yep, you could bring it back. We just carve out a time at the beginning of the year, but it was in July when we changed it for the student liaison, and that was because an opportunity presented itself. So, again, we can respond to opportunities.
If it can happen in a single meeting, then that's fine. If it has to bounce from this meeting to a city commission and then back.
Nope,
that takes
you're in
a little
charge of
more.
your own bylaws.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yep.
these are our own bylaws.
But that's a good point, you don't want to get stuck in a gray area. Yeah.
So yeah, if there is a county staff person and the county is willing and able to have a liaison, I'd be all in favor of that.
Who else? Jerry?
I just have I actually don't know this, but what was the reasoning for the county to dissolve their planning? I know that they don't have the same purpose, but
Are you suggesting that the county does things with underlying reasoning?
No reason.
I'm just wondering, because it seems like if they're open to this new position, I mean, that's like a sign that they're engaging in something that they haven't. So that's interesting to me, but I just didn't. It strikes me as interesting that they.
Yeah, I mean, the best I can kind of do is speculate. I think there was some politics at play. They were going through a lot of transition in city manager at that time. They had hired someone who left. Mr. Menzel came on for a while. It was going through a lot of transition, and I think they were looking at cutting some things that they felt weren't necessary. Obviously, I think planning's of value, and I think having a broader view than just each individual jurisdiction is of value to all of us, because many of these problems that we're talking about are regional: housing, stormwater, traffic, things like that. So I think this is the county administration's first attempt at moving back towards that direction. So they didn't call it a planner. He's a community development coordinator.
And this was a move that was made by county administration, not by the county board.
Yep.
As an example of what board politics can do, earlier this month at Leelanau County's organizational meeting, the first thing they did after deciding on who the chair and vice chair will be was, okay, we had a county task force on energy, that got terminated. They had a county task force on housing. They were going to terminate that until, that was actually established by the planning commission, so it's their jurisdiction, so we can recommend that they terminate it, but we can't do it here.
Shay, you sent points in, so would you like to speak to them?
I think they're pretty self-explanatory. The chart is super helpful, and to Brian's point, I understand that it's up to the city commission, but the planning commission can push that. I mean, looking at this chart, what makes Traverse City so unique that they need to have 2 elected officials on the planning commission? We're facing a lot of the same problems as Cadillac, Frankfort, Gaylord. I looked up other cities around the state, Hazel Park, Ferndale, Ypsilanti. They all have similar populations, Owasso, Wixom. Some of them have 0 elected officials on their planning commission. Most of them have 1. So I guess I'm just curious, like, why do we feel that we're so unique that we need 2? And nobody's ever been able to answer that question for me other than it's been tradition. And I don't accept that as an answer, I guess.
Well, let me answer that, because, one, we're talking about the bylaws changes. We can't put it in the bylaws. Can't be our bylaws because bylaws are how we operate. It's not our decision to make. I would recommend, if you feel strongly about it, you propose it at a future meeting, put out your proposal and your reasoning, that we send a letter to the city commission, and we just vote on it.
And I guess I was under the impression that that's what this was.
Well, it
That's
would
what
be a
we all
separate
agreed.
action, and we're discussions.
Right,
But,
yeah,
but
yeah, I
I'm
guess-
just saying, it's, we keep, playing with these things and moving one meeting to another. We're not gonna include it in the bylaws, it'll be separate. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I think because, again, it's really, the people to answer that question are the city commission.
Right.
As a group.
Yeah.
And if you wanna send that letter, you can also send it as an individual. Or you can get the people who agree with you if you don't get a majority to sign it. I'm okay with that, I'm okay with voting on it. I'd think about it. But again, I think that, one of our goals is improving communication with the city commission, and it just depends. And it always depends on the people and how things are handled, and more so than who sits here. I know some people think, I've heard an argument where someone said that they thought it offered a broader perspective of the community. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, in theory, it makes sense, but in practice, it just doesn't work that way.
And you're talking about having 2.
I'm talking about it,
Because
whether it
someone
helps
said-
or doesn't help.
Yeah.
It's, again, it's just, you can push the question, you can ask them, but unless you're getting some feedback, the city commissioner would consider it.
Because they would have to change their ordinance.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, if they want to do it and change the ordinance, then I'm not sure, why spend a lot of time on it? I'm just saying, I mean, you've already heard from 2 commissioners who aren't too keen on it. So then you would basically asking the city commission, the other 5, to remove them from this board, okay? After they've already set all their assignments. It's not going to happen this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't
So,
expect
if
it
you-
to.
Yeah, but if you wanted to bring it up, the timing would be better to bring it up in like November or December.
Yeah.
Besides then, there'll be an election in November. So it's something that, that'd be a good time to bring it up. And I just don't think the timing here really helps us out.
Yeah.
But politically, they could have new members, and new members might say, you might ask, nobody might want to be in the planning commission.
Everybody in this room is city residents, I believe, and they could all run for city commission.
So,
But you make a very good point about the timing
Yeah.
of when to bring this up, I think. And one of Shay's points for bringing this up was it opens up another seat for someone in the community. That was his major point there.
and I understand that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I personally think you're right that, maybe it's something that we can bring back up towards the end of the year, like maybe September,
Yeah.
October, something like that, and see if there's the will to go ahead and bring it before the city commission. Does that sound good to everyone?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, even though this topic was brought up during the discussion of the bylaws, it can't be addressed through the bylaws. So it
Yeah.
is kind of separate. So we can move forward with the bylaws, dare I say, put a pin in it. I hate that. But I think Brian's got a good point, and I think you guys have mentioned here, that first meeting in November is the organizational meeting of the city commission after the election, and that's when they pick who serves on what things. I think as we approach that, that may be a better time to line up proposing such a change if there is a desire for it. It also gives time between now and then to have conversations with your elected officials or, to see, what's your thought on it? Is it worth even pursuing? So it is something we can keep on the burner, bring back later if desired. I'll kind of let that direction come from members of the planning commission, but there may be a more opportune time for that discussion.
Yeah, that was a very good point. So is everybody good with that? Okay, so I want to bring up one more thing under bylaws that I meant to bring up last time and didn't. And this has come up before. And that is, and again, it's our bylaws so we can make these decisions, is how much and when do we want to have public comments? So some organizations have public comment at the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting. Our city commission has public comment after every agenda item. So we have been having public comment after every agenda item. But we don't have to. We can change to public comment at the beginning and the end of the meeting. And I wanted to see what people thought about that. Our agendas are put out way in advance so people know what's going to be on them. And it's not trying to cut off public comment in any way. It's just you comment at the beginning on what's on the agenda item, and you comment at the end. Now, I think it obviously makes meetings shorter, for one thing. But also, I've been a member of the public who's wanted to comment at a city commission meeting. And what I wanted to comment on was 3 hours into the meeting. And I had to sit there, until it came up. So I think it's actually helpful to the public that they don't have to wait until we get down and down and down and down to whatever it is they want to comment on. And if they want to stay at the end, till the end and comment again, they have that choice. So I just wanted to throw that out, see what you all think about that.
Can I add 2 additional points to that?
Yeah.
As you guys are making that consideration. And one is how public comment during a meeting relates to a public hearing. So we have items that require a public hearing, like a zoning amendment and stuff like that. And the reason that is put into the act is because state law only requires 1 public comment period during a public meeting. Most do 2 at the beginning and end. So you don't really get the opportunity to ever speak on items at the time, with the exception being a public hearing. That's what makes the public hearing special, is you get to speak to the commission at the time that they're considering that. By having public comment on everything, it kind of negates the public hearing process, which, take it or leave it, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, just pointing that out. So just kind of keep in mind the requirement for a public hearing is to give people that opportunity, recognizing that it's not how things normally function in a public meeting. The second item is the chair can open public comment any point during the meeting. So if the planning commissioners recognize that there's a lot of people to speak on a subject and we don't have public comment, a planning commissioner can ask the chair to consider opening public comment because they know people are here to speak on it. And they can, that's a possibility. So I just wanted to put that framework out there too about how things work and things.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification, because I always thought our public hearings were, they never made sense to me in that context of because we offer comments on every item. I was like, this is some sort of obviously we have to do it. It just was.
But what is it, right?
Right.
What made it different?
Because then we'd open the public open the public hearing and then close it because there'd be no comment anyway.
Right.
I watch a lot of public meetings, and I've watched the county, because they've tried to change this. I just feel like depending on the topic, you're going to get a lot of more comment. So, I don't really have a problem with just leaving it how it is in terms of, tonight, we've had some public comment. If anything, it's more of the chair remembering to ask for public comment, but I don't know. I think to the point of if you just do it at the beginning and the end, I don't know. I guess I don't have a strong opinion other than that. The way we have it set up, I think it offers plenty of public comment opportunity, and if someone's coming here to give a comment, they can do it pretty efficiently and not rely on a change on the moment of saying, okay, let's allow the public comment to happen. For your point.
No,
Like a 3-hour meeting.
Yeah.
they could come in theory, watch it online, come knowing their
Oh, well, they
topic's
could.
coming, get their comment and leave. But,
Yeah.
so I don't have a strong opinion. I don't really have any desire to change it, but that's just my thought as a.
Okay, I think I saw Brian first. Lots of hands were up.
Well, if you looked at our number one goals we're going to have, it's improving communication.
Thank you. Brian and I are
This just
thinking the
reduces
same
the
thing.
opportunity for communications. So I wouldn't support it.
My thought was just, can we kick it under that goal? And when we research and investigate that communication goal, can we, if we decide to change the bylaws, just bring it back up again and change the bylaws and leave it for now? Because I do think it's directly related to that
It is,
first
yeah.
goal.
Yes, I have gone to a lot of meetings, both this side of the desk and as a member of the public. Before I got elected to the city commission, I had gone to 70% of regular scheduled planning commission meetings and city commission meetings for 3 years. I've gone to a lot of township meetings, gone to a lot of county meetings in multiple counties. I can say that you can end up, especially if there is a hot button agenda item on the agenda and there's only public comment at the start and end of meeting, Grand Traverse County has had a meeting where it takes 3 hours before they end that initial public comment and can actually get to the business of the meeting, which that doesn't make the meeting shorter, and that makes all the staff people that might be waiting with their presentation queued up about some budget allocation or some policy change, they have to be waiting there. Also, in terms of the quality of the discussion, compared to speaking at the start of the meeting when you don't know necessarily where the commissioners stand or what the sentiment in the room is, if it's after the deliberative body has already had some deliberations, then members of the public can gauge, hey, these are the points that have been already brought up. This is where people feel I don't need to spend a full 3 minutes trying to convince them of something they already believe, so I can have reduced remarks saying, yes, I agree, maybe you should consider this, etc. And just in terms of recognizing that there could be a lot of people for something that may be later in the meeting, with the city commission, definitely we have recognized, hey, this is something that is going to be a hot button issue. It's currently way down the agenda. Let's move it right up after consent calendar so that we can get that done and over with. The 50 people that are here can then leave, and then we can do the rest of the meeting without feeling like we're holding those 50 people
I
hostage.
think we've done it actually here. Becky?
Just to reinforce, I think that a move like that would be counterproductive to improving lines of communication between the Planning Commission and the public. I think there's potential for confusion having a different policy than the City Commission has. And I think if we want to remain open to input from our community, it's imperative that they have a chance to tailor their comments.
Well, thanks, everybody, for those comments.
I
Oh, do you have one? Sorry.
Yeah, I think I brought this up at like one of my first meetings, and I think it was Chief Teller. He said, well, there's generally not a lot of people in the room that want to do public comment. And I was kind of thinking about it, and I was like, that's all the more reason to not have public comment after every agenda item, because just put it at the beginning, put it at the end. You know, like, people can sit through the whole meeting if they want, or they can get their public comment out of the way. I think we get smarter, you know, more insightful public comment at the beginning of meetings because people have to do their research rather than sit through our discussions and listen to us talk. So that's just my thoughts on it. I would be in support of reducing the number of public comments.
Well, I think what I heard from Anna anyway is let's roll that into the research on communications, if we roll it in at all, and we can bring that back up when we have a communications maybe it is a policy, whatever that turns into being.
So just to recap what I've heard today, as what I'm taking as kind of our marching orders, is we will bring the bylaws back at the next meeting in draft form for possible enactment or adopting of the amendments. Keeping the number at 9, not doing anything with the composition of ex officio members at this time. That may come up by the lead of the Planning Commission at a more opportune time in the future. Not going to do anything with the public comment at this time. It may be part of a future discussion under another topic. We will keep the language for the student liaison in there that was inadvertently overlooked in last year's rearranging, and we will add some language for your review on a county liaison for consideration.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So the county liaison's going to be part of that?
Yeah.
Okay,
And then we'll bring that back. If there's anything major I missed, please let us know, but that's
Sounds
what
good.
we've kind of heard so far. Okay.
okay. Any other discussion on the bylaws? Any public comment on the bylaws? All right, we'll move to our last discussion item, which is on short-term rental regulations.
Yep, so bringing this up to you guys, looking for some direction. We've been talking about it for some time because it was a 2024 goal. As you know, we came back to you and said, hey, instead of a separate committee, since this is a lighter lift than establishing a whole new riparian ordinance, can we maybe have these discussions at the Planning Commission? And you guys agreed, and we are grateful for that. So we provided a document, an overview at the October meeting that has been included again. I do want to point out an error in that document that's attached to the memo, and that's the HR Hotel Resort District. Thank you, Brian, is actually 100%. So that's a typo in there, not 25%. So, and that's relating to the number of units in a building that can be vacation home rentals. So, some of you sent your comments, so we copied and pasted them and put them in there. I'm not going to speak of them. I'll let you speak to your own comments. But in the interest of, just moving the needle a little bit with direction, we did make some staff recommendations just for consideration and talking points. One is, I think we would recommend trying to work within the existing framework that we have for short-term rentals, which is 1% in each district. That's what we're all set up with in the clerk's office and the planning department. Of course, we could do more. We could do it completely different, but we would like to work with the resources that we already have and things like that, and the programs that we have in place. So the nice thing about having 1% in each district is it allows the proportion of short-term rentals to grow as the proportion of long-term rentals or owner-occupied units also grows. So it doesn't create just a static cap, but that may be the desire of the Planning Commission, is to institute some sort of cap in that nature. I will say I have heard in the discussion so far and in comments sent that there is a desire not to have them at all in the D districts. I'd like to get your feedback on that, because that would be a change that would need to be included. Keep in mind, only D2 has a 25% limit. D3 and D1 allow 100%. You may want to give some special considerations to C4, which is the downtown district. 25% might work in a lot of these districts that are at 100. But if you recall, granted there are different city commissioners now, but in 2020 when these changes were sent to the city commission, a reduction, downtown was one of the areas that are like, well, we allow hotels, why would we limit it? So maybe 25% is too low. Maybe that's a district that could go a little higher given the nature of how downtown works and its commercial activity and stuff. Or maybe the desire of the Planning Commission to see more long-term rentals, and you want to find a different balancing number there. I would also say to, and this came as a recommendation of the mayor, the two-tiered tourist home system. You're right, it's not really creating problems, but as a practice, I don't like having ordinances in the book that we can't really enforce. It just feels like a lot of lip service, and so therefore, that's where I think a change would just be appropriate, because it makes things a little more realistic to people. I think people aren't stupid. They know we can't enforce that. So why are we pursuing it to maintain it? And I understand that in this line of work, sometimes those are the type of compromises you have to make politically to get things over the finish line. But now, 8 years later, is it still necessary? We had that same conversation with the ADU cap, right? So just throwing that out. But that is kind of what we threw out as something to consider. And with that, we would be interested in hearing your direction collectively that you want to head, so that we can start teeing this up as an actual amendment and enact some changes.
Brian, do you want to start with your comments that you
No, I
sent in?
want to take this one point at a time.
Yes.
Can we do it that way?
We need.
Your
Can't-
point?
No, your points.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to talk about, it's a big topic, with a lot of different things. If you want to talk about the cap first, or is it a cap? Because you talked about, we referenced the 25% we already have, but that's a limit on existing structures, not a limit on the overall number. Are you recommending an overall cap as a percentage of the number of living units in the district, or are you you're recommending per building or structure?
Per structure, yeah. So in other words, that's the system we have in place right now. And so just looking at these districts where we do allow 100%, maybe it gets reduced. You know, it seems, what I've been hearing is we want less short-term rentals and more long-term rentals, and that's one way. Because as we talked last time, if we had a number like that in place in C3, Trailside 45 probably wouldn't have flipped all the short-term rentals, you know, because at most, 25, whatever the limit could have been. It may not even have been appealing enough to a buyer to buy and even condominiumize if the number of short-term rentals is that low. It could have possibly have just stayed as a long-term rental property. The cap, as far as like a hard max number in the city, my only draw on that is you might hit that cap and you may have a great project like Common Ground, there's so many commons on 8th Street, I get confused, where, you know, they have a pro forma where they would like to provide some short-term rentals, but that loss of not short-term rentals, affordable rentals, but that loss of rental revenue gets offset by having a couple short-term rentals. So they're kind of dabbling in both, and I know with some of even our affordable housing providers, there have been some options that they've looked at as they've gone through their pro formas of like, okay, to make these numbers work, what if 2 of these units were short-term rentals, things like that. So I guess ultimately a hard cap could make it hard for some of those projects where a short-term rental might be a good fit to actually be implemented.
We left the 25% in solely as an inducement for development, okay? And that was why, to create more housing, even if 25% of them would be short-term rentals. So, yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that. I think one of the things, if you want to pursue extending those caps to the existing structure or a per district cap, my question would be, I'd want to see more data on that. And the reason I'd want to know how many buildings and what's the percentage of short-term rental units in existing buildings and compared to the living units in those buildings in these other districts. So that's kind of my question. I want to see the numbers, and then I want to see if we adopt something that says 25% or 50%, and suddenly we're creating, 350 non-conforming units because they're all grouped together in one building. Then that's my question. So, I think that's something you got to look at going forward if you want to pursue that.
But I think we can go back further.
Yeah, yep, and we can start with Dave being our zoning administrator who has these records, pouring through some of that. I will say, it was just probably...
Don't tell Dave it was my idea.
Oh. We're going to put a sign up. It's Brian's idea wall. No, we can start compiling some of that data. Shoot, there was something I was going to say on that. No, it has slipped me. Oh, I know, it was just a month ago. There's an individual that owns a healthcare office, and then on their property behind it, they have like an 8 or 12 unit multifamily, and they were inquiring about rezoning to C3 just so he could convert them all to short-term rentals, because that's 100%, because right now he can't. And so despite whatever shifts might be happening in that market, some people are still looking at some of those options, and so that's out there. Let me kind of ask, to Brian's point, some pointed questions as we go through this. Are you interested collectively in maintaining a system where we have a percent in each building. It sounds like you want some more data, but, I mean, are you guys interested enough to where we could invest time in pulling that all together and stuff like that?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
In theory, but I question, for some districts, like, we allow up to 25% in R2, but unless you have a non-conforming thing, you don't have a fourplex on an R2, so what would that 25% amount to?
You mean C2?
C2.
Yeah, they're not allowed in R2.
C2. So it does say, in the it's addressed in the language. I think you have to have at least 2 units, and in that case, you can have at least 1 B. So there is a call out for that in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, 1 up to 4.
Yep.
After 4, it goes to 25%.
Then it goes to 25%. Yeah, so if you have less units than
You have to have 8
4.
to have 2.
Yep. Correct. But yeah, you're still allowed that use, and it addresses that. Okay.
I got a comment on that, and that is that the impression I got when we started this discussion is that there's a desire to kind of reduce or eliminate short-term rentals in these districts. And this would not, capping it a percentage by district or installing those would not reduce the number of short-term rentals. And so it would allow continued growth of short-term rentals in new construction and existing buildings. So if you have a building that's currently 8 units, okay, and then 2 of those units could become short-term rentals, okay? And so you would be, now technically if it's already 100%, you'd be reducing the number, the potential, but you're still allowing growth. I don't have a really strong feeling on how you cap this one way or the other, but if you want to cap the growth, then you have to start thinking about, and maybe you ask the city commission if they want to cap it and do it both ways, do a police power ordinance. Let them set a hard number of licenses they're willing to issue, and let them set a hard percentage by the number of dwelling units in the city that's reviewed every year. So.
And I do think that there will be some instances, based on what you said, Brian, about like why D districts. So I think there are some that we could we not drop it down to 0% in some if we felt like the industrial doesn't make sense
100%.
and D districts don't make sense. Just because I have to say this, I have to say it every time. I so badly wanted C3 and C4 to not have 100%. And I am pretty sure I voted no because of that, or there were multiple motions on the floor and it was a lot. But I really think that should have gone through on all of them because there are so many buildings that you now see in C3, C4 that are just pure brand new builds, only short-term rentals. So I think that was a hugely missed opportunity, and I don't want to keep that sitting out there too long. So I would say just arbitrarily, C3 and C4 down to 25%. Ds, I don't really know where I stand, but could go down to 0, and industrial 0. That's just and so HR is on here. HR, I don't see why it couldn't go up, frankly.
So that's the typo, it's actually 100%.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
It
I was like,
should
wait.
be 100%.
And
Okay,
that's the
great.
hotel
Great.
district, so it makes sense.
And I thought
that's-
that we
yeah.
had, yeah.
That
Okay.
was my error, I apologize.
Nope,
Thank
I
you.
also forgot you just said that.
And I want to credit Brian for that, and I do want to also let Brian know that Dave Weston is watching. He texted me.
So, where does this hospitality house fall, where
So
they're in violation?
hospitality houses, those are located in the hospital districts, and when you read the language, it is intended to be, they don't require, to my knowledge, Katie, a short-term rental license.
I don't believe
Because they're a separate use, and they're, by definition, intended to provide transient housing for patients or family members of patients at the hospital. As was evident in the information I put in the
Yeah.
report, they're not being used in that way. They're basically an unregulated short-term rental.
So how do we change that back to the use that it was intended to be?
Well, that's a good question.
I don't know how that you can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're just they're abusing it essentially. They're breaking the local law on that regard. So.
But, I mean, I'd hate to think that, there's a cancer patient and his family needs to stay at the hospitality house and can't because it's being used as a short-term rental. I mean,
Even if we change it though, Sean, it doesn't, they're still grandfathered in as is,
not
right?
the hospitality house.
So there are uses that have been approved. So on the corner of 7th and Elmwood on the northeast corner, for instance.
Oh,
light blue.
yes,
So across
yes.
7th from French Manor 2, I think. That is intended to be a hospitality house.
Right.
That's where I pulled these reviews from.
Okay.
Yeah, so, if
They
it-
would not be grandfathered.
Well, if they went away, they could technically still be a hospitality house. It would
Right.
probably be a shot across the bow of like, okay, now you're being watched, like, this has to be for legitimate purposes and stuff, and maybe there's a license that needs to come along with that. Ultimately,
like
that's up to the
that.
city commission,
I
you know?
really like that.
Part of my desire to stick within the percentages, yes, it goes to the city commission, but it doesn't require a lot of police power tie-bar changes that you have no control over, that you just hope the city commission is also on board with, That's that whole idea of working within the existing framework that we have in place through those ordinances. So, I thought I heard just a pretty solid consensus that we don't need short-term rentals in the industrial district necessarily. Okay, I just want to make sure I heard that. It sounds like the D district is a little open for discussion still.
Anna said D to 0, but which D did you mean?
All of them.
All
I
of
don't,
them, yeah.
I mean, that's not when I look at the definition of a D district, it doesn't necessarily fit that. It's not, yeah. Like, and a proper example would be 8th Street. Would we want that to, 8th Street is D2, so it could be 25%.
D2 is
But
25.
It is 25.
Yeah, but if a lot of those, if any of those, like Reduno, that little strip mall thing, if any of that changed ownership, they could knock it all down, put up housing, or put up units that look like housing, and 25% of that could be short-term rentals. And I feel like that would be an incredible waste and not a benefit for the community. So that's like the biggest fear, is that happening in areas that we are intentionally trying to expand and move housing into, where we so desperately just need housing. I think that's why I move for, like, I would prefer 0.
And what's the rationale that D1 and D3 are 100% and D2 is 25? Does anybody know?
They were all 100%. D2 changed just by merit of the Planning Commission work on the 8th Street section.
Okay.
So D1 and 3 weren't part of that scope, but I'd pose this question to the Planning Commission. Common Ground, that development, or the development at Gillis Street, which one of those would you want to see more of?
Well, obviously not Gillis.
That's a rhetorical question. You don't even want an answer to it.
I have a different answer to
That
that.
tells us right there.
I fell into the trap.
No,
It's
that's
fine.
okay though, because then that tells us, okay, then we got to do something. We can't keep that at 100%, which I think is the goal anyways. But, trying to think of, okay, within the context of these different percentages, how they've actually played out in real life development, do we have problems with this one? Did we wish this would have been a little different? Like, try to apply it to what you see in the built environment and the actual results that were coming. Because my only cautionary, tale I'll put out there is we'd hate to kill the efforts to subsidize affordable housing by completely eliminating them in some districts. Just putting that out as like a devil's advocate thought, because that's how it worked for Common Ground. And it may be other areas as well.
So if we reduce the 100% to 25, would that help those
Or 10?
I mean, Common Ground came on live with the 25%. That was a number that could work for them. But again, it's up to the planning commission. If they're like, nope, the need for housing way outweighs everything else, we gotta go to zero, then that's a discussion for you all to have.
I don't hate a smaller number.
I just want to, I don't know where I stand on this, but we need a different example than Common Grounds as short-term rentals subsidizing affordable housing, because that was a very, very unique project. And I don't know of any other ones in our community. I don't even know that I can name one in the state. So I guess like, I struggle with that one because there was a lot of community investment that helped with that project. And I just think it's such a unique project that to put it on this pillar of like, this is what short-term rentals can do. I've heard that so many times now, and I'm just like, I invested in that project, so like.
So you're part of the short-term rental problem.
Exactly, I'm part of the problem.
No.
But
So, maybe you make a very valid point. It is very unique. I think it might have been the first in the country.
Yeah,
like a real estate
it was, yeah.
So maybe a better example would be what's called Boardman Flats, a little further east on 8th Street on the other side. So that's, I think, 8 units, and 2 of them are short-term rentals.
Okay.
Because they're within that district. But that's maybe a scale that you can wrap your head around a little better. That's not as unique.
I agree with Shay. You keep using that example, and the fact is if you want to use that example or make it, then you require it in the zoning, that you have to have affordable housing, however you want to define that, and have units. A lot of communities have requirements, that require so many affordable units in these larger places. Now, that's been, we've talked about that since, that's been out there for the last 6 years, but it's complicated, difficult to do and difficult to administer. And so I understand that. But, I mean, if you really want to use that as an example, then tie bar it to it, that but also, when we rezone that, and expanded the D2 district, we, at this, it was also the same time that we restricted C1 and C2 down to 25%, so it made sense. We also talked about the other 2 D districts, and it was kind of decided, let's deal with just this zone first, and we'll get to the other ones later, which we never did. And then one of the complaints about I think the Red Mill, the one downtown, was why is it even a zone D? It should be rezoned to probably C3. Not that that would have changed that at all. And I have no problem putting some type of cap on C3. I guess, and I'm okay with putting caps on the other districts. But if you want to eliminate it from the development district, my theory still stands. And simply that, it's a district that's supposed to be, for developed, that it accommodates the type of development the city wants. What I'm hearing from city officials is they don't want any more short-term rentals. They already exist, but, they're zoned in, so let's just get rid of them. I mean, I'm okay with that.
And you made a good point. I did pose that to the city attorney. I know she's a little stretched thin right now, but I'll bring it back up. Because we can't do inclusionary zoning, where we say for every development, 25% have to be affordable. But we do offer incentives, like we allow in the
Old Town C3,
district,
you can have
go
another
up,
height
yeah,
with
15
residential.
more feet if you have residential. And that was put in to incentivize what the city wanted at the time, which was residential downtown, because there really wasn't any. That's not really as much of an issue anymore. That was back in 1999 when they were working on that. But I did ask her, could we put in some sort of formula that for every short-term rental within the unit, you have to have one affordable rental, and that would have to be defined as what it is. So in other words, it's like a tit for tat. Like, yes, you can get this. The trade-off is you have to provide this need for our community. So I'll follow up with her on that and bring it back to the next meeting. Be a really nice tool if we could do something like that to balance both these needs and allow short-term rentals to exist almost an equal footing moving forward as affordable units. So
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the great, if we could figure out a way to, because if you're trying to develop a property or repurpose something and you can get a short-term rental, like, you can be more creative by having that there. I mean, I'm thinking like, it's not the same downtown, but like some of the businesses that have put short-term rentals on the second floor and been able to keep like their business and get some additional revenue that maybe kept that business from selling, or like, I just think it gives a little flexibility to the property owner to have, you know, and I'm saying like, let's convert a whole building to short-term rental. It's just like having a couple here and there is probably enticing to a developer or someone that's trying to, you may imagine if you could, I don't know, I just like the Common Grounds isn't the best example, but like that is an example now that could be replicated, like, hey, let's have a mix here that allows something to actually happen. So, I mean, I guess that's where I'd be more opposed to not going to zero on everything, or, you know, I think having that option there is helpful moving forward.
Yeah,
At least I don't know.
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, it is getting late. Mitch, let's-
Yes. Earlier in the meeting on a different topic, Sean had alluded to that there's a trend in zoning to collapse zoning categories. If we're looking at the D categories, I think that D1 has been virtually built out, and we have seen significant development in D2 and D3. It might be not part of the short-term rental discussion, but worth rolling them into existing C categories. If we are going to allow a certain percentage of short-term rentals, and I'll just pick out D1 and D2, and I would extend that also to most of C1 and C2, that if you're allowing X number of short-term rentals, then there has to be some other incentive to provide either with short-term, either affordable housing or meeting some other community need.
Yeah, and, you know, I'll put this out there as a consideration. In one community I worked with, it wasn't short-term rentals, but design standards.
Mhm.
They put a list of 10, and you had to incorporate 3 into your design. The planning commission could consider something like that. You know, maybe there's other objectives that you want, community objectives that we want to achieve that we can incentivize through the short-term rentals, whether it's public art or something. Just throwing it out as something to think about. Now, Jerry, you mentioned the business owners. I'm coming back to my thought now. I think a good example, there's a shoe store downtown, and
Golden Shoes.
As I understand it, you know, by using short-term rentals, they were able to get enough revenue to afford that renovation that we as residents all benefit from that improved street facade, right? They ripped down the old, restored the historic. That's how I understood it, just talking with the individual and stuff. So, again, that's where it was leveraged for a greater community good.
Yeah.
That case.
Hannah?
I feel like I am really oddly conservative on this topic. Like, I feel like anything that we do is probably too late, frankly. We have let this go for so long that we have a saturation of short-term rentals. And I worry that if we continue to take that conservative stance, like we continue to try to edge and hope that by lowering the percentage, then maybe they'll build it. I just don't want to leave that up to chance anymore. I think that Jess's article was really great. It had a lot of different kinds of solutions in it, and I think that this percentage is going to be one of the one of the layers or one of the tools. But there are so many other things that I really want us to be able to spend time on and focus on, because I do believe it's just too late. I think, like, unless you do something like some of the very larger cities like San Francisco or New York City that were mentioned in that article, it feels like whatever kind of efforts we make, we will not be finding enough long-term housing for the vast gap that we currently have. So I am just all for trying to fix that because I think it's too late, and I will always just prioritize long-term housing as somebody that is a renter that has never owned a home and would love to. I think we have to prioritize that for the future of the city.
I would agree.
I agree. So where are we going to, Mitchell, one more comment.
Yeah.
And then,
Sean had brought up Common Grounds as the good, and
I'll stop doing that.
Gillis, but on the other side, Gillis Street as the bad. I would argue that the problem with Gillis Street is how it looks, not how it operates. If you had short-term rentals that were all condensed into one hotel building, then it could still be as ugly, but I haven't seen as many hotels that are as ugly as I have seen condo boxes. And you would have an articulated facade that is one single building that wouldn't have a bunch of separate driveways with separate trash receptacles. And I'd say, as evidenced by Hotel Indigo, and now I think it's still on the way, but a hotel next door, that is a part of town where hotels are well suited. So I'd say the issue there is the zoning code allowed condos to be built, and then they could be short-term rentals, but it didn't have the same flexibility for a hotel to go in there.
Hot take, I actually love the look of Gillis.
I was gonna say, I do
Love.
too.
I
do
love it
too,
so
like,
much.
yeah, you know,
I love
it
it
gets
so
so
much.
tricky.
I walked by it for years, and I was like, this is so beautiful. It's going to be so great. There are going to be so many people living in that, and it's dark. So that is what I love. I love the look of it. I love how condensed it is and how many people you can fit in a tiny little space. I just hate that it's empty.
I think we have to wrap this up. We can be talking about this for days, but we have to figure out how we're going to move forward with this. And maybe, I really love the article that Jess found, and there were some really great things in there, and some of them were, pretty out there. And maybe look at that and others of cities our size that are tourist locations, and maybe send in some suggestions of what you liked about those articles and how far you're willing to go with this. It's one way we can do it. I heard a discussion that we want to reduce these 100% to something, maybe 25%, maybe 10%. I mean, I'd like you to send in your ideas about what the percentage would be that would make you happy. And maybe we could go from there.
It is, I think that's some good direction, thank you. And it is possible that within each district that you have those caps, like no more than 25% of the units within a building, but that must operate under maximum citywide cap of X, So yes, you can have 25 in here, but if there's only a handful of licenses left within that hard number, but we would need some direction from the city commission, so I'm looking at our two city commission liaisons as you guys report back, if you could broach some of these conversations of, any direction that they're willing to provide and what they're, interested in supporting. The worst thing is to have all the wheels spin for months and then let it not go anywhere. That kind of happened the last time around.
Jackie?
In my exploration, I think what you're suggesting, which is I explored other communities that had found a multitude of ways to restrict short-term rentals. And one was Sarasota, the other one was Charlottesville, Virginia, and the surrounding county. And I'm pretty much aligned with Anna in terms of we're already overpopulated with short-term rentals, that it may take a police powers approach to significantly carve that back. which is why I requested a study session at the city commission. Some of the ideas that surfaced in my search were rentals could only be hosted. RBO, it's yours and there will be no one watching over you, was banned. That registrations were non-transferable and were only annual. That absentee owners were prohibited. That there were minimum stays of 7 days and nights. And there were some communities that had found a way to head taxes on short-term rentals. I would add to this the idea of, if indeed we're overbuilt on short-term rentals and underbuilt on long-term rentals, to take a look at, are there ways to incentivize conversion of short-term into long-term? And I don't even know what that might look like. But that if we have an imbalance between something proactive, balance that.
And we keep hearing that the short-term rental market is saturated, but we can't just sit here and hope that it's going to turn into long-term rental. Ryan?
So I don't see us, go to Anna's point, I don't see us ever being able to carve back the existing number of short-term rentals. We've permitted them under zoning. They exist under zoning. If there's a legal way to do that, then and the city commission wants to do that, then they should act first, find out if they can legally do that, and then ask us to, in that framework, to design our zoning. Okay? I just don't know how you tell someone who's had a use, and now you try to tell them it's allowed by zoning, but we're not going to allow it by this new police power code. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah,
I think the city's going to be spending a lot of time in court with that one.
Well, and you have to be careful, because if you implement a police power ordinance, that's really acting more like a land use regulation, but you didn't go through the zoning process, that'll get overturned. What I may suggest is, why don't you guys focus on more like the percentage in the districts and stuff like that. When we send whatever you recommend to the city commission, they don't have to take it up right away, right? But then that's gonna almost force them to have the conversation of the police power side, okay? If we're gonna change these numbers, what do we want to change on the police power side, the licensing, which isn't this body's purview, but they're probably not gonna have those conversations until something's put in front of them to think about. And that's where you could start having the conversations with the incentives with the attorney, because this body can't do anything with incentives. The city commission can. So I think by getting something to them, you will start that conversation at the next level with the two planning commissioners who serve on the city commission, taking that information and carrying the torch a little bit. And then ultimately, they may come up with something that requires them to send that amendment back to get it in a line with where they're going. But it's hard to get them to respond until we give them something, is what I'm finding. You know, put something in front of them that they can comment on and actually have a tangible piece of policy, if you will, as opposed to just, well, what if? I think just giving them something will be more productive in the long run.
I guess my question is, do planning commissioners want to try to actively reduce the existing number, or do we want to slow the future growth of them in various districts? And that's, you know, or stop it completely. Those are really three choices. If you want to reduce the existing number, then I don't see us, I think you got to wait to hear back from the city commission. Send them a letter if that's what you want. I just don't see it happening. I don't see us having the ability to do that under zoning. Or ask for a legal opinion from the city attorney and just table everything until then. If you want to slow the growth or cap the growth, you can do that. That's within our power. And I think it's really a question for everyone. Do they want to slow it, or do they really want to cap it through zoning? In other words, you know, I mean, you can do that through zoning. My recommendation is to, really, is I'm looking at slowing growth, and if the city commission wants to cap it, allow them, as Mr. Winter said, we'll put our percentages down, we'll send it up to them, and with that, we'll put together, you know, that they should consider, it's up to them whether they want to consider putting a hard cap on short-term rentals. And, you know, I think, you know, how hard they want to make that cap, whether it be by a percentage of the number of units or just a straight cap, is up to them.
And is there anything we can do to incentivize turning a short-term rental into a long-term rental?
That's a question.
Money.
And that's why
Any
we don't
money?
have any authority to really
all money.
engage in those
I know.
discussions on this
It's
board. I mean,
But anything they can do at the city commission level with incentives?
well, that's for them to explore with their attorney.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The one thing I haven't heard mentioned is a moratorium, not a permanent cap, but a moratorium on additional licenses for a set period at all. I mean, that was East Bay Township's approach. Are there any pros or cons of that we should surface?
I'm probably not going to touch that. I think the attorney would need to comment on that one. There's a lot of legal ramifications with moratoriums, and I don't think this body could do anything with,
I think
it'd have to
that's a
come from
city
the city
commission.
commission. So it's really, you know, that's where, when we send something up to them, that's where that next level of conversation will have to occur with those incentives.
So let me ask you, so this meeting on April 28th, is this still going to be a joint meeting of both bodies?
I don't believe that's settled.
Okay.
I think it began as city commission only. I think it morphed toward a joint. I think that now perhaps it sounds like it's more appropriate that it be a that's instigated and supported by the zoning proposal from the planning commission.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I think we should also consider percentage in the hospitality district.
You mean just so that it's not an open,
Yeah.
not disclosed currently?
Right, I
yeah.
mean, I don't know how we ever thought we were going to enforce that. I think we just
This whole
got,
thing has to
we,
be
you know, we were
enforcement.
afraid of, you had people coming up and, you know, they had letters of, I don't know if they were real letters or not, but probably, you know, people who were aided and assisted by it, but not everyone's gonna follow it, and I don't know how you enforce it, you know, without, I just, you know, that's something the city commission would have to look at doing in the hospitality district. And even those even the, you know, the suggestions, there may be people who were there, you know, for hospital-related uses, you know, but we just don't know that, and there's no way to know it. So, yeah, it was probably a mistake when we did it, but,
Okay, so
you could allow it as a percentage.
because of the time, and staff has heard everything we were bouncing around, let the staff work on proposed reduction in numbers, what you just said about the hospitality district, and bring it back to us so we have something to discuss, and we're not spinning our wheels. Is that works for you guys,
Yep.
from what you've heard from us today?
Yeah,
mean,
I think that
clearly
gives
there's-
us.
I think the clear message is we want a reduction in short-term rentals, whether it's a cap or percentages or how we're going to do, we want a reduction going forward. Like you said, the ones that are licensed now, I mean, I don't know how you reduce that.
Yeah,
But-
we're really
so-
talking about moving forward.
Yeah.
You know, that's where the city commission and the conversations with their attorney can explore, you know, zoning has legal nonconforming status, police powers do not. But we have this use that is governed by both. So how far can we go with some of that? And that needs to be a conversation that she needs to guide through that. So that's one thing I want to add. Because it was mentioned, we keep within this conversation of short-term rentals, talking about long-term rentals, because ultimately that's our goal and trying to
Right.
get that balance. I just want to manage expectations, and you probably know this, but the housing ecosystem has many levers, just like we said during the planning, the housing reform discussions, right? No one lever is going to be a panacea. So just so that we know, we're not going to suddenly solve the housing crisis by limiting short-term rentals,
No.
right? There's a lot that goes into it, but every tool we put in the toolbox
Makes it
us
better.
more equipped for that. So I think that's known, but for any public that's watching too, just know that it is a complicated
So
regulatory
you'll have
ecosystem.
discussions with Lauren too, and anything we need to know about, that'll be included in that next packet.
Mhm.
And one of the things I asked, and I'm only thinking of trail side, I don't know how often this has happened, but buildings that are built for long-term rentals somehow flipping to short-term rentals, is there a way for that to never happen again? How do we do that?
Well, yes, in some ways. I think we could explore that. I mean, we have plenty of districts. Take our multifamily, right? You're allowed to have certain commercial uses in buildings built before a certain date or buildings built after a certain date. So it could be that these regulations apply to any new construction moving forward. These are the new limits moving forward.
Right.
We can play around with that and
Yeah,
dig
but I
into
want
it,
that
but-
included, and especially if you have to talk to Lauren about that. Jackie?
I am making a request that we be sure to gather information on short-term rental license renewal patterns. How many are allowed to lapse over what period of time, how much turnover there is. I think that would be helpful to Debbie's point about, is there going to be a natural attrition that we might be able to press?
Mitchell?
Yeah. Going off of that, if we're looking at, okay, we have a saturated market right now, but there may be opportunities that we would allow additional short-term rentals to facilitate something like Common Grounds where it can financially offset.
With more long-term rentals.
Yes. Sorry, Sean. But if the market is currently saturated, as we have heard, then that incentive doesn't really exist as a functional tool unless there is either through attrition or through some other tool filtering out of some of the existing licensing. So I'd say a lot of the potential looking at zoning for where and what intensity it will be is a little premature until we know what tools are available.
So are you suggesting we bring this back up in a month?
I would hope to bring it back at our next meeting, keep the conversation going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to send it in, be prepared by the next meeting. Look at all these percentages, think about reductions, think about caps, and come in with your thoughts written down. Or we can turn them all in like we did this time, and it can be in the packet. What do you prefer? But I'd like everybody to do it.
Okay.
I mean, everybody.
Since I already turned mine in, do
Yeah,
I have to do it again?
Only if
To be
you-
clear, I also turned some in, but they weren't good enough for here. Because it was just
Oh.
like, you do you.
I forgot yours, yes, sorry. I did it.
Okay. So,
It
yeah,
was-
only if you have more to add. If you've done them, you've done them. So I liked having it in the packet. I thought it was helpful. So can we all agree that before the next meeting, like, when do you need this by? A week, in a week and a half, something like that?
Publish on Thursday.
It's published.
Not next Thursday. Yeah, because we have a
Give
Do
us a
your
date.
best.
Give us a date. When do you
We're
want it
already
by?
Wednesday night now. Yeah, by Wednesday at the latest.
So in a week.
Yeah, because we have to then start compiling all the
Okay,
stuff.
so by next Wednesday, send it in. Brian?
Can we table the tourism home and the hospitality and deal with it separately?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Sure.
Okay,
Yep.
so it's just like it's a different topic, different zoning act.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
And I want to empower you too with the knowledge that none of these changes that you're proposing, if they go into effect, have to be permanent, right? Like, you're going to do your best but you can always change it if you learn more. Like we did that with the ADUs. It went through 3 significant revisions over about 8 years, you know, but at some point you got to start and then see, oh wait, that's not quite the outcome we want. What do we need to change to kind of rein that back in? So I appreciate all the due diligence. You won't be able to predict the whole future though in this process, so just know that.
Okay, I think we've had excellent discussion. May I open it up for public comment? Anybody have a public
Can I
comment?
make one comment?
Oh,
Sorry.
yes.
Just when you send in stuff, if you could send like specific, just because we're going to have that tight turnaround, like specific ideas and things, I would think would be helpful.
Be
Okay.
specific.
For us
Be
to
specific.
be put in the packet.
Katie?
Katie Bernardato, Traverse City resident. Obviously, this is going to be a topic that I'm interested in. I own Golden Swan Management. We manage short-term rentals across 4 counties up here. And I think, you know, bringing this back to discussion is really, really wise. I think Brian and I probably have a trauma bond from discussing this 8 years ago. It is an emotionally charged topic, but I do think that it's important to bring it back and revise based on changes, market conditions, things like that. I also represent the Michigan Short-Term Rental Association, which is a statewide organization, and our goal is to work with communities like ours, municipalities, townships, on short-term rental regulation. I travel all over the state, and the goal is to walk into a room and bring the temperature down and discuss regulation that is cost-effective for your taxpayers, less arduous, and actually enforceable. And I've seen a lot of creative solutions. Over the years, we really have it pretty dialed in as to what works, what doesn't. What works in one community may not work in ours, but we certainly do our best to make sure that we're presenting all of the data and facts so that you can make an informed decision. And Meister would be happy to be a part of that discussion and help any way that we can.
Thank you, that's great. Any other public comment on short-term rentals? Any other public comment on any other topic? Okay, then I think we can adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for the great, robust discussion.
I just want to add, with this being a late meeting in the month and the next one being an early one in the month, there may be some questions that don't get answered. Just less than a week to really pull it together, but we can keep the conversation going.
And I would just like to say that I am glad we are once again operating under a full complement.